Okay, hello everybody. I will be presenting you some music while we wait for our dear friends. Tonight we will be listening to music from Wolf Asylum. I will be sharing his info a little bit later, and while we wait for the others, here we go. Enjoy, please. Test, test. Hello, buddy. Can you hear me? So, as I said, this music is from Matt Wolf. I'll be sharing the poems that the music that he does. So this was Matt Wolf, and we keep on listening to him. His next music is Chatter. Chatter from Matt Wolf.
those of you here in the pre-stream listening, this music is brought to us by Matt Wolf. I call him Wolfie, but yeah, this is Matt Wolf's music. Thanks for being here, guys. We're going to be starting off the stream any moment.
Thanks, John.
So, just leave the music running for a bit. We can just chat for a second. How's your week been, Cordell?
My week was excellent. I'm just gonna lower the volume of the music though a little bit, so we can hear you. Yeah, my week was excellent. A lot of work, a lot of running around, but on and on, it was all good. I'm really looking forward. Oh,
I can only hear you through the stream. And just for lag purposes, I'm muting that one. So
no, it's done. It's done. It's yeah. You should definitely tell me this kind of stuff. Thank you.
Oh yeah.
So no, my week was excellent. It was pretty chill. A lot of things going on in my life, but on and on, I'm looking forward every week to reading poetry with all of us. So it's awesome, puts me in a good mood.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, Vexing.
Or end your day, I suppose, for most of you.
Quality writing.
Thank you.
Hey, Vexing, can you turn up your outbound ever so slightly?
I'm at 80% at the moment. Let me check that out here.
I can raise the volume on my side too.
No. It's for me, it's better too. I'll take a listen through the stream in just a second. But for me,
here, this is 90%. How's this?
That's lovely. Here, I want to just do a test while you two guys talk for a second through the stream.
What should we talk about, Cordell?
I guess we could read a couple of poems. I'm gonna put our visage on stream. There we go. Hello, everybody. So,
test.
Should I modify the sound on you guys on your side? Talk a little.
Is it good? John, is it good?
Well, I think I'm ever so slightly quieter than you guys, but once I get going, once I get really rambling, then no, it's actually perfect. Like if I speak quiet, I'm quieter, but as soon as I start blowing them pipes, it'll be fine.
Okay, perfect.
Like you do.
Yeah, I know. I get fired up.
Mm-hmm. It's true. Nobody can argue with your enthusiasm, that's for sure.
Well, if you guys want, I have a couple of poems, original poems that I can read before we start the show.
Nice.
Let's see. I'll take one that I feel it would be adequate. Okay, so this one is called "Only Stoics Can Fight." I wrote it a couple of years ago. Only the one who loses everything can really appreciate its value. Only he can really use its strength to perceive from all things their real value. Even when life becomes surreal for him, he will make out that objects are things. From concrete to abstract in a scheme, he'll see what's loyalty from worshipping. Only he who loses his well-being can really value others and their health. Whatever's maintained of their remaining, he will perceive the true worth of their wealth. So yeah, that was a little poem. I don't know.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, can hear you just
Oh,
fine.
cool. Word.
We can start when you're ready. Also,
Just a
you
few
do.
seconds.
Yeah.
We're almost there.
Got a couple of good quotes here ready to go too.
Should I keep on doing quick?
Before we get started here, just in the low content banter section, what about you, Vexing? How's life? How'd your week go?
It was a good week. You know, doing the thing. Was kind of interested in reading up more about today's highlighted poet and philosopher, and looking forward to next week's edition. We've got some good people in store over the next couple of weeks. So doing that research has been oddly satisfying, finding poets and then finding more information about said poets. So it'll be it's going to be fun over these next few weeks seeing where this ship goes.
I'm sure it will go on the right direction. Seeing how it's going right now, I personally love it. The last show
Mm-hmm.
we did, I was so impressed actually by what we did actually, literally. I felt it was humane and beautiful at the same time.
Mm.
And we've got so
I was
much
mentioning
good
I was
feedback.
mentioning this to Cordell, but for me, I've been the most disappointed in this project with this feeling of incompleteness. Like with William Blake, we did last week, and it was so good. You know, William Blake is such a character. I mean, we just spend a week studying, do a couple-hour show, and then it's like that's it. And I realized that that's kind of what I want this whole project to be for people is
Mm-hmm.
like a catalyst to inspire the hunger for knowledge and understanding and learning and culture. So it's working for me, and I hope that it works for other people in that sense too. That they sense that inadequacy, that this project is what it is, and it couldn't possibly um, be enough to be comprehensive on these subjects we're talking about. So, yeah,
Mm.
We have the
I guess what I'm
company of.
saying is I share your excitement.
Thank you, man. We have the company of Not Ricky here, uh, who's just saying hi on the hello on the comments.
Oh.
Yeah. Hey, hello.
No Dreaky, what up? So,
Oh.
um, audience participation is encouraged. Um, definitely, definitely welcome. If you have any perspective philosophically on the stuff we're talking about, or want to suggest a specific poem from the weekly topic, I think it's about time to start the show, guys. Are we all? We got all our ducks in a row? We ready?
Well, yeah, but what about you, dude? How was your week? Did,
Great. I bought a kayak and put it in the water. First time, not first time ever kayaking, but my first time with my new kayak, and it's been years. And it was such a great experience. I bought a MIDI trigger keyboard to use with my software. Last week we played some of my original music. Well, you'll hear some more of it again later. But basically, just been doing some stuff to try and be healthy and creative and human to
uh,
express my humanity. I have to say, this whole project's been inspiring me to do more things to take care of myself. Just in a variety of ways.
That sounds great. Jeez, you make me a little
So
bit
yeah,
envious. I wish I could do kayaking with you.
yeah. Yesterday I put this kayak in the water. I rode around the lake for about an hour. I don't know. I was meaning to go into this marsh near connected to this lake that I'm near. It was just I'm really pale, so the sun itself started to be a threat to me. I realized I should have put the sunblock on that I had with me already, and I don't know what I was thinking. So I went back to shore. I ended up getting some fish tacos that were fucking amazing, and I had such a good time. And the sun was like about to go down. I'm like, I'm getting back out on the water. So that was my day yesterday. It was great.
I love
But
it.
yeah, the week in general has been good. Been really, I don't know if focused is the right word, but inspired by this project, just here and there, different things moving forward. I'm not sure where this is going to land as far as all of our different like connections and communications. So yeah, lots of different aspects of this are really exciting, and I'm looking forward to continuing with it. I'm so glad that you guys are here,
Heck
and
yeah.
anybody listening, whether you're here live listening to this tape later, I doubt these exact words will make it into the edited podcast format. But yeah,
Well,
thank you to everybody.
you should check out comments that we received from No Tricky. It's super nice. Cheered
Uh,
me up. Do you want me to read it? So, No
oh yeah, I
Tricky.
can see.
Yeah? Read
Yeah,
it, please, because you got a better voice for
this is
that.
from Nadriki. Yes, I really loved your William Blake reading. It was purely brain food for me.
I love it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. Right.
So, yeah, I think we should
So
start.
let's go ahead and kick this thing off.
Should I put a timer, or should we just jump in?
It doesn't matter really. Oh yeah, you want to put that thing on the screen? Go
Yeah.
ahead.
9. There we go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's edition of Not for Nothing Poetry and Philosophy for Living. Brought to you by myself, Jonathan Block, Vexing Cat, and Cordell. We're here to share our love of poetry and philosophy with you and try and help illustrate a through line between these creations of understanding and meaning that can be either very obvious or entirely mercurial and ineffable. Each week, we're going to take a different subject, whether it be a specific philosopher, a specific poet, a specific philosophy, specific style of poetry, and really dive into that. And since we're focusing on poetry and philosophy, we've decided that for at least the first month, the first good chunk of episodes, we're going to do famous philosopher poets to try and kind of ball this all together into a nice, meaningful context. We did Rumi in our trial run episode. Our first official episode was last week with William Blake. And this week, I'm happy to announce that we are focusing on the very influential poet, philosophical poet, Percy Bysshe Shelley. The middle name Bysshe is spelled Bysshe. I'm not super confident on the pronunciation. I've noticed speaking with to people about this that nobody seems to be. But when I was watching some documentaries on the subject, a very confident British pronounced voice said Percy Bysshe Shelley, and that's what I'm going with. I think before we really get into it, I think we should just go ahead and toss in a reading of a poem or two, maybe a couple of quotes, and we can start getting into historical contextualization, his importance, appeal, some of his influence, and the overview of some of his philosophies. But first, let's get a little content in there. Do either of you guys have a poem that you think you'd like to read out of the gate?
Vex, you're welcome to start if you want. Otherwise, I do have one at hand.
Let me see. I had a few here. It's a matter of picking which one we want to have first. Readily available, I do have a couple of quotes. I think I should start with one of those and then grab a poem here.
Agreed.
Let's start with. So, Percy Bysshe Shelley, am I saying that correctly? I
As I
believe.
mentioned, I went with Bish, but
Bish.
I think that's
Percy
what you
Bysshe
said is fine.
Shelley. Okay. Oh, wind, if winter comes, can spring be far behind? Another one. Oh, lift me as a wave, a leaf, a cloud. I fall upon the thorns of life, I bleed. Yeah, just a couple quotes in, and I can already tell this man's a true romantic. He really is. Let's see. And then let's grab you. Okay. Hellas Chorus by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Chorus. The world's great age begins anew. The golden years return. The earth doth like a snake renew her winter weeds outworn. Heaven smiles, and faiths and empires gleam like wrecks of dissolving dream. A brighter Hellas rears its mountains from waves serener far. A new Peneus rolls his fountains against the morning star. Where fairer tempests bloom, there sleep young Cyclades on a sunnier deep. I, a loftier Argo cleaves the main, fraught with a later prize. Another Orpheus sings again, and loves and weeps and dies. A new Ulysses leaves once more Calypso for his native shore. Oh, write no more the tale of Troy, if earth death's scroll must be, nor mix with Leon rage the joy which dawns upon the free. Although a subtler sphinx renew riddles of death Thebes never knew. Another Athens shall arise in remoter time, bequeath like sunset to the skies the splendor of its prime. And leave, if not so bright may live, all earth can take or heaven can give. Saturn and love their long repose shall burst more bright and good than all who fell, than one who rose, than May unsubdued. Not gold, not blood, their altar dowers, but votive tears and symbol flowers. Oh, cease! Must hate and death return? Cease! Must men kill and die? Cease! Drain not to its dregs the urn of bitter prophecy. The world is weary of the past. Oh, might it die or rest at last?
Right. What do you think about that one, Vexing?
That was something. I mean, he's talking about all of these different things, just like references to Egypt and Athens and like death itself, Hellas, and he's going to Greek and all of these different mythos, and he's talking about if Earth's death scroll must be, just like he's talking about death. Why must death happen? Why must men kill and die? And live out this bitter prophecy. It's tragic. And I think the romantic nature of his poetry is really, really apparent in this particular poem, which is why I picked it first. What are your thoughts on it, Cordell?
I thought it was amazingly read for first and second. It's intense, and you're right. He's a romantic poet in all his glory, really. Uh, in the poem itself, yeah, it's intense. I mean, yeah, I'll give the word to Blocks, please.
Well, some of the content honestly glanced off my psyche a bit. I was more paying attention to the rhyming scheme and the style a little bit. Um, Throughout my preparations in the last 48 hours for this episode, I was focusing earlier a lot on the philosophy, and just recently I was looking more into the stylistic elements. And yeah, I would say this. I think of every romance poet that I've looked into, I've noticed a fascinating juxtaposition of I want to call it daintiness, but just like this specific, predictable meter that gives you this kind of a feeling of like prancing along as an innocent child. And then, even though I wasn't focusing on the content, it's kind of obvious that it was a much more serious and grave proposition than what the form would belie, which gives it a sense of irony to me, somewhat like Voltaire or even William Blake that we were looking into last week.
Those romantics sure know how to turn a phrase, don't they?
Mm-hmm. I think what I'll go into at this exact moment is the historical contextualization of Percy Bysshe Shelley. We can get an idea of when he lived. I know for myself, I was never good at names and dates ever,
Do you mind
but
if, before we do that, I read a poem also?
no, not at all. But I'll just make this point
Yeah.
that for me, names and dates were always difficult to memorize. But once I started kind of just thinking about overlapping figures where, if there's anybody that you knew lived at any time, and then you can realize they're before or after that, just even like a vague understanding. Like this was a romance guy. I'll just state his birth dates and we can get to the poem you wanted to read. He was born August 4th, 1792, and died July 8th, 1822. Oh gosh, he only lived to be 30 years old. Uh, yeah, please go ahead and read one.
So this one is called Tonight. I was just reading it, and it felt also that it was pretty connected to the romantic subjects you guys are talking about, this approach on life and the look he has over it. So, Tonight by Percy Shelley. Swiftly walk over the western wave, spirit of night, out of the misty eastern cave, where all the long and lone daylight thou wovest dreams of joy and fear, which make ye terrible and dear. Swift be thy flight, wrap thy form in a mantle grey, star in rout, blind with thine hair the eyes of day. Kiss her until she be wearied out. Then wander over city and sea and land, touching all with thine opiate wand. Come, long south. When I arose and saw the dawn, I sighed for thee. When light rode high and the dew was gone, and noon lay heavy on flower and tree, and the dreary day turned to his rest, lingering like an unloved guest, I sighed for thee. Thy brother, Death, came and cried, Wouldst thou me? Thy sweet child sleep, the filmy eyed, murmured like a noontide bee. Shall I nestle near thy side? Wouldst thou me? And I replied, No, not ye. Death will come when thou art dead, soon, too soon. Sleep will come when thou art fled. Of neither would I ask the boon. I ask of ye, beloved night, swift be thine approach flight. Come soon, soon. This is, I really loved reading this thing, blogs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Um,
So,
I appreciate how at the very end he broke out of the sort of the pattern that was laid before, like somewhat rigidly. Well, fair, pretty rigidly, and then at the end, it kind of just has this change of shape, um, along with the word soon, and that created a lot of feeling for me reading that poem myself.
Yeah, I feel the same way, and the reason I read it is because, um, personally, as a writer, I I feel a wave of inspiration at night. I don't know if you guys have the same feeling, perhaps as artists yourself, but when night comes, a lot of feeling come, and it's true. He makes reference about love, opiate, wand, and things like the things that are done at night. Basically the things that people do out of the perspective, the eyes of others, and even that reference of dead itself, the dead veil when come thou art dead, soon too soon. It makes me think of how many people actually think more about, um, desperate ending at night rather than during the day while everybody's busy and under the sunlight. So I thought it was really intense. Like, I can relate to a lot of the references in this poem.
All right. Well, I'm gonna hop right into the historical contextualization, and we'll move on to some more content. Percy Bysshe Shelley, born August 4th, 1792, died July 8th, 1822, was one of the major English Romantic poets, who is regarded by some as the finest lyric and philosophical poets in the English language, and one of the most influential. A radical in his poetry as well as in his political and social views, Shelley did not see fame during his lifetime, but recognition of his achievements in poetry grew steadily following his death. Shelley was a key member of a close circle of visionary poets and writers that included Lord Byron, John Keats, Leigh Hunt, Thomas Love Peacock, and his own second wife, Mary Shelley, the author of Frankenstein. Shelley is perhaps best known for classic poems such as Ozymandias, Ode to the West Wind, To a Skylark, Music When Soft Voices Die, The Cloud, and The Mask of Anarchy. His other major works include a groundbreaking verse drama, The Cenci from 1819, and long, visionary, philosophical poems such as Queen Mab, later reworked as The Daemon of the World, Alistair, The Revolt of Islam, Adonius, Prometheus Unbound from 1820, widely considered to be his masterpiece, Helios, a lyrical drama from 1821, and his final unfinished work, The Triumph of Life, 1822, coinciding with the year of his death. So, just naming a whole bunch of works there towards the end might not be useful for this purpose, but I think it gives an idea of, for a 30-year-old man to have written so many influential pieces. I think it's telling as to the gravity of this poet philosopher we're covering.
I'm impressed by the liaisons he had. I mean, basically, he had very influential friends. When you mentioned his group of poets that he hung out with, I mean, Lord Byron, Keats, his wife Mary Shelley. She. All those people must have been a blast just to hang out with. Perhaps a little depressing sometimes because of the romantic side they had, but still.
Well, uh, perhaps, do you think there's another quote or two that would be worth putting in here, Vexy?
Hmm. Indeed. Let's see. I've got. Hmm. Poets are the unacknowledged legislators of the world. That's a pretty solid one. Let's see. Rise like lions after slumber in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to the earth like dew, which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. I think there's some political message in that one. Like, rise like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. We are the many, they are the few. So, something
Sounds like some um, revolutionary sort of, you know, power to the people type stuff.
mhm. Let's see. Soul meets soul on lovers' lips. Yeah, when you commingle souls at the touch of a kiss, I think that's a pretty romantic idea. Really. What does the audience say? Would you care to translate for us, Cordell? Mm-hmm. Ah, okay. Well, I have a couple of short poems or a longer one. Which would you prefer? Okay. This one is called The Cloud by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I bring fresh flowers for the thirsting flowers. From the seas and the streams I bear light shade for the leaves when laid in their noonday dreams. From my wings are shaken the dews that waken the sweet buds, every one, when rocked to rest on their mother's breast as she dances about the sun. I wield the flail of the lashing hail and whiten the green plains under, and then again I dissolve it in rain and laugh as I pass in thunder. I sift the snow on the mountains below, and the great pines groan aghast, and all the night 'tis my pillow white, while I sleep in the arms of the blast. Sublime on the towers of skyey bowers, lightning my pilot sits. In a cavern under his fettered the in a cavern under is fettered the thunder, it struggles and howls as fits. Over earth and ocean with gentle motion this pilot is guiding me, lured by the love of the genii that move in the depths of the purple sea. Over the rills and the crags and the hills, over the lakes and the plains, wherever he dream under mountain or stream, the spirit he loves remains. And I, all the while, bask in heaven's blue smile, whilst he is dissolving in rains. The sanguine sunrise with his meteor eyes and his burning plumes outspread leaps on the back of my sailing rack when the morning star shines dead. As on the jag of a mountain crag which an earthquake rocks and swings, an eagle alit one moment may sit in the light of its golden wings. And when sunset may breathe from the lit sea beneath its ardors of rest and of love, and the crimson pall of eve may fall from the depth of heaven above. With wings folded I rest as with wings folded I rest on mine airy nest, as still as a brooding dove. That orbied maiden with white fire laden, who mortals call the moon, glides glimmering over my fleece-like floor by the midnight breezes strewn. And wherever the beat of her unseen feet, which only the angels hear, may have broken the woof of my tent's thin roof, and the stars peep behind her and peer. And I laugh to see them whirl and flee like a swarm of golden bees, when I widen the rent in my wind-built tent till calm the rivers, lakes, and seas. Like strips of the sky fallen through me on high are each paved with the moon and these. I bind the sun's throne with a burning zone, and the moons with a girdle of pearl. The volcanoes are dim, and the stars reel and swim, when the whirlwinds my banner unfurl. From cape to cape, with a bridge-like shape, over a torrent sea, sunbeam proof I hang like a roof, the mountains its columns be. The triumphal arch through which I march, with hurricane fire and snow, when the powers of the air are chained to my chair, is a million-colored bow. The sphere fire above its soft colors wove, while the moist earth was laughing below. I am the daughter of earth and water and nursling of the sky. I pass through the pores of the ocean and shores. I change, but I cannot die. For after the rain, when never a stain, for after the rain, when with never a stain, the pavilion of heaven is bare, and the winds and sunbeams with their convex gleams build up the blue dome of air. I silently laugh at my own cenotaph, and out of the caverns of rain, like a child from the womb, like a ghost from the tomb, I arise and unbuild it again. Yeah, that was
Amazing
that
reading.
was something. It like his prose on clouds. It just he thought like he set the scene in almost every stanza, you know, cresting across the sky, hiding the moon, bringing the rain, bringing the snow, lashing thunder by. It's just, it's a beautiful poem. It really
I
is.
realize it could have been a choice on your part, but I feel as though it, it inherently did something. It like picks up speed, sort of. It just has this like the meter and intensity of it. It's like it wanted to go at a certain like almost like a march, I guess, even though it's not like a Sousa march. It's like it has its own like life where it's kind of stamping along. I notice his meter seems to do that. Same with somebody like Voltaire, where it's just it wants to ambulate in a certain way. And like as you read it, I felt like it was sort of picking up steam of its own like volition. Like I say,
I,
it's
it
obviously
it
you
wasn't it
read it,
wasn't
but
intentional on my part, but
you know,
I could feel it. I could
yeah,
definitely feel it.
that's what I'm saying. It's like I could sense it the way it was pushing itself through. Like almost like when you see music written down, it could say like Allegro or Andante or whatever it is. It's like the specific words and meanings together almost dictates a certain pulse and tempo that it kind of demands and has a life of its own.
Mm.
On my side, I have a really hard time because I find the poem extremely beautiful, and while you were reading it, I was actually picturing the scenes you were describing, but I was trying to find a meaning behind it. And I'm actually. I the poem is so beautiful that I'm not perceiving the secret metaphors as easily as with William Blake. Actually, it's
Yeah,
yeah, it's pretty intense.
I think there's a difference there in that uh, from mm, the I get a certain feeling from looking through Percy Shelley's work that while he seemed to be into metaphor and irony and layered meaning to some extent, it was nothing like Blake in its intentional levels, and that he was willing to have a flower be a flower and just kind of throw his heart to the wind and just make more unironic, just deadpan statements about his passions. It's just the vibe I get. I have no real um, nothing to cite to make that definitive, but from the looking through it in the last week, that's the feeling I get, that he was capable of layered um he was capable of layered meaning, but was not necessarily enthralled by it. He seemed to be more enthralled by passions and wanting to express those passions, like through his love's philosophy as an example. Really famous poem of his. Should
Yeah.
I read that one?
Wait, just before you read it, I totally agree with you, and actually, it's a feeling that I have too about his poem. he's not going so far into the metaphorical side as much as showing beauty for beauty itself. And yeah, it's another way to actually write than Blake, in the sense that somehow I feel like he gives us a perspective of his view on the world, when rather Blake was actually sort of telling moral stories, even though they weren't exactly moral stories, but there was some sense of um, defiance in it, I guess.
Yeah,
But yeah, go for it. Sorry, Blocks.
that's fine. This is a brief one of his, very famous, called Love's Philosophy. I'll read it. The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean. The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single, all things by a law divine. In one spirit meet and mingle. Why not I with thine? See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. No sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother. And the sunlight clasps the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What is all this sweet work worth if thou kiss not me? So, uh, this seems to be a case of what I was just referring to, where what I see in this poem is a young, passionate man who's in love with a woman and wants to convince her to be with him, and is intuitively searching to all of his philosophy and depth, not to serve that philosophy in depth, but to serve his carnal passions, and on some level to manipulate her altruistically, like not in this like selfish, petty way, but to be like, come on, baby, can't we just be together? The universe is like this sort of thing. And just that, like a lightning bolt of passion, romantic passion through the heart, to write this poem to try and make the hard sell to this chick. Like, I really am a passionate dude who's part of this beautiful universe, and I want you to be a passionate agent who's part of this beautiful universe with me. And literally, like, that simple. And it's not some like complicated layered commentary on the nature of existence, other than through the incidental parts of romance being part of a higher philosophical reality. He didn't really mean it that way, as some sort of really articulate, planned, strategic, layered thing like you would see in everything from Blake, or even Rumi, or I don't know who, Nietzsche, somebody else. It's like a very I sense a very large amount of earnesty in this poem, and lack of cynicism, and lack of irony and metaphor. Even though there's metaphor, I mean, he's talking about, there's metaphor there. He's talking about the rivers mixing with the ocean. Like, that's a metaphor for love, but not so much in a deep philosophical way, but more an observation that's trying to get to the point of like literally loving a woman and wanting to talk her into it.
I think he was talking of beauty for beauty's sake, to be honest. Should we read another one? Perhaps I can read. Wait. A Lament by Percy Shelley. Oh, world. Oh, life. Oh, time. On whose last steps I climb, trembling at where I had stood before. When will return the glory of your prime? No more. Oh, nevermore. Out of the day and night, a joy has taken flight. Fresh springs and summers and winters hoar move my faint heart with grief, but with delight no more. Oh, nevermore. Yeah,
That
that
was so good.
I like it too. And you know, I wanted to read this one after the one you guys read because he managed to see beauty even in the lamentations basically. I love it.
Hmm.
I love the style of work he has. It's an extremely romantic perspective on life, I have to say. What do you think,
I
Brooks?
noticed his I noticed his use of the word nevermore, I think in another poem recently, not as the last word, but as another word. It just makes me wonder if Poe Edgar Allan Poe was a fan of Percy Bysshe Shelley.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I've got some relatable quotes on that romanticism again.
Yeah,
Uh,
please.
so, poetry is a mirror which makes beautiful that which is distorted. That's pretty deep. Makes me think of you, Cordell, and your poetry. Deep stuff. Let's see. Man's yesterday may never be like his morrow. Naught may endure but mutability.
What?
Hmm. I'll read that one again. Man's yesterday may never be like his morrow, meaning the future is always changing. Naught may endure but mutability, and that is the ability to undertake change.
Not may endure.
Naught. Mhm. Naught may endure but mutability, meaning if you stay fixed, you will not endure. You must remain changing and evolving and constantly changingly adding to your perspective. Because if you stay, in the same shallow pond that you believed in,
I'm trying with this the not may endure. So not that you will suffer through a different reality, but that you yourself will become different. And that's what will make this future that seems potentially negative to your current self more hopeful and better, that you can evolve and change to a different circumstance that might seem uncomfortable to the current self.
I could see that. I mean, the very definition of mutability is the liability or tendency to change. All things
Yeah.
change.
Yeah.
I particularly like this poem. It's 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 very real in a sort of raw way. Like it basically talks about the passage of time and how people evolve from point A to point B,
Mm.
and the fact that we thought that movement, that passage of time, you well, people basically stop being. If people don't move, if they're not alive, if they don't always somehow go forward, and we can't go backward. It's that easy. Not in this existence, at least. And going forward is basically the only option because staying in one spot means, yeah, it's finished. It's the end of the
I
line.
want to I want to dig in here for a second on the concept of change in that I was going to speak more about his influential, like how influential he was before I got into his philosophies, but I wanted to mention this. Um, okay, so he was radical and a revolutionary in certain ways. He was into nonviolent action politically. And what I mean is that he was willing to rethink not just the specifics of morality, where he was an atheist and a vegetarian, and that was really unpopular. And so he had trouble getting published because people were worried they would get persecuted for promoting his ideas. He was willing
Mm.
to reevaluate things on a personal level, but more importantly, he was really willing to reevaluate the structures around them, considered to be he liked anarchy, not a stateless anarchism, but a responsibility of the individual to revolt against what they saw to be incorrect. And so, in this concept of change, what I'm saying is this: he was a forward thinker in certain ways that we look up to now. Where someone like Martin Luther King, who was influenced by Gandhi, who was influenced by Tolstoy, who was influenced by Percy Bysshe Shelley, I believe all of them quoted poems from Shelley. But what I'm getting at is this: things that he saw as change, we see as normalcy because of his courage and goodness. I don't know, is inherent good naturedness that we still resonate with. So what I'm saying is his daringness to change, we see and can look up to him for having been a decent man and presenting that and influencing us. But moreover, as a meta comment, besides that, I think we can take to heart that we may be able to see change that he couldn't, standing on his shoulders of moral benevolence, I guess we could say. I don't want to put too much on it, but what I mean is that if we do agree with what he said and the positive effects it's had, the the drop that he put into the pool resonating outward, creating more and more of that vision. Now, from where we are, perhaps we can see with more moral clarity something better than he even advocated for. Meaning, not only could we aspire to do better within the context that seems to be more broadly societally agreed upon, perhaps we could have the courage to look forward and do better and see more than he ever did from a vantage point we've been afforded by such positive ideas. That's what I'm getting at.
You do make an interesting point, you know, like, uh, well, his influence on the changes we've had and that nowadays we take for granted uh, has been on such a scale that, uh, well, you said he's good, but the truth is, I think he was helpful. And because of his love of beauty, probably he connected beauty with being helpful, and that's what we perceive as a person that's being good. And what's funny with that is that
Mm.
he was also an anarchist by the standard of his time, because basically he lived in a place where very few people had rights. Everybody was dominated by king, country, and religion. And when I say dominated, I don't mean like nowadays. I mean literally on a leash. So I think,
I'd like to make a brief disambiguation
yeah,
about the term anarchy. This is more from a political viewpoint, a political science viewpoint than philosophical, but it derives from philosophy anyways. It goes like this: the term anarchy ends up being used as a smear for certain political ideologies, and the smear is that they argue for statelessness or complete chaos. Like anarchy can mean chaos or statelessness, and it can mean that in good faith from the person saying so. I don't know if Percy called himself an anarchist per se. I know he looked up to certain philosophers. We'll get into more on that in a little bit. But what I'm saying is that insofar as I call him an anarchist, I mean this: anarchy can be defined as a lack of desire for unnecessary hierarchical structures. It's sort of a weak version of the concept of anarchy, but I think it's an important one where if someone's willing to question the hierarchical structures, they're not necessarily advocating for statelessness or chaos, meaning that the word itself can have a broader, dilute definition that's a lot more useful in these contexts. And I just wanted to disambiguate that for the audience, that when I'm referring to Percy Bysshe Shelley as an anarchist or liking anarchy, I'm not necessarily trying to stick him with being like an anarcho-capitalist weirdo who thinks that things can exist in the total vacuum with no courts and stuff. You know, that certain things like taxation is theft, or the government has a monopoly on violence, and these different narratives that come along with certain anarchy things that you might have become accustomed to. I'm using this word very broadly and very loosely, and I don't know if he did or did not think anything about, like, perhaps I don't know that he condoned taxation from the state or not. So there's different narratives there, but just to simply have a disdain for unnecessary hierarchical structure, I think is both, it personally in my politic, a good thing, and also definable as anarchy. And I just wanted to, pull those threads apart a little.
Yeah, you're totally right to point it out.
Well, I think what we can do right now is get into some of his influence, the reach of his influence. We'll take a quick that we can read a couple more. We'll take a quick break, get back, and get into the specifics of his philosophy. So,
Sounds good.
during his time, most publishers and journals would not publish his work out of fear of arrest for blasphemy or sedition. So, I think it's amazing that a guy who made it to 30, freaked everybody out, and basically wouldn't get published, managed to have as much influence as he did. I think it's a testament to his ideas themselves and how much they carry weight. He influenced Chartist and other movements in England, which I haven't even looked into. It's just a reference I saw. I'm sorry for my ignorance, guys. I don't know what the Chartist movement is. I could look in, we could look into it now if we want. Apparently, he's been influential in English society in a number of ways that carry on beyond his specific ideas. He was into economics and morality. He did some political stuff, like little pamphlets outside of his poetry, that were very forward thinking, very brave. He released pamphlets about vegetarianism and excuse me, not non-violence, and atheism. He was basically trying to, in a non-violent way, protest against theism, and that was very unconventional and made him sort of unpopular in many ways. And I'm not sure if his atheism really propelled his ideas at all with anybody. I would say that his perspectives on love and passion and justice, beauty, metaphor, stuff like that is what really carried him. But his willingness to challenge the status quo is definitely evident in his philosophy, and he influenced Marx quite a bit. I'm pretty sure Marx was an atheist. I wonder how much that's important in his popularity with intellectuals that he was an atheist. But anyways, he got into economics and morality and influenced Marx heavily. He influenced Tolstoy heavily, who in turn influenced Gandhi, who in turn influenced Martin Luther King Jr., who in turn influenced the American civil rights movement at large. And I would argue, with all the quoting I see going on of his poetry, that with that daisy chain of influence, there was also direct influence, meaning Gandhi would quote poems from Shelley and MLK would quote poems from Shelley. And I suspect that, at least loosely, that a lot of the people involved in the American civil rights movement were influenced directly or indirectly by the concepts put forth by Shelley. So pretty much any nonviolent protest, some of the basic principles of the structure of the American government seem to be predicated on a concept of nonviolent protest being part of normal American life. So the country that I'm from and live in seems to be, to no small part, molded by some ideas it looks like this guy kind of came up with. So there's that. I guess he influenced Robert Browning and Dante Gabriel Rossetti. It seems I don't know a lot about that. Oscar Wilde, Thomas Hardy, George Bernard Shaw, Bertrand Russell, who we're going to do an episode on soon, W.B. Yeats, Upton Sinclair, and Isadora Duncan were all influenced by his work, if you guys are fans of any of that stuff. And then civil disobedience as a concept at large seemed to be influenced by him. And the piece by Henry David Thoreau named civil disobedience, while there's no direct citations to be made, seems to be influenced by his ideas of nonviolent protest and political action.
You know, there is something that I'm impressed by what you say, in the sense that, okay, he definitely influenced a lot of humanists that, you know, we we know historically. But also somehow it feels like people that have a general concept of what's being helpful rely on each other, you know? And well, to me, like the chain of the domino effect that you mentioned was, to me, it reminded me how much people rely on other good ideas that come from other good ideas, and then the fact that they get together to talk about those ideas. It's it's a really unifying force in humanity, I would argue. That concept of wanting to be helpful and wanting to organize into a more helpful force.
Bexing Cat, do you have any specific poem that you think would be worth reading on the subject of his influence?
On his influence.
Yeah, or really
Mm,
any poem. You want to read a poem, maybe get a quote or two in there before we go to the break?
I do have a couple of short ones of his
Please.
and a couple of quotes. So, The Waning Moon by Percy Bysshe Shelley. And like un and like a dying lady, lean and pale, who totters forth, wrapped in gauzy veil, out of her chamber led by the insane, in feeble wanderings of her fading brain. The moon arose up in the murky east, and a white and shapeless mass. I apologize, blocks. I can hear typing.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Go ahead and
I'll
start
read
this
it
one over.
again.
I apologize.
It's okay. The Waning Moon by Percy Bysshe Shelley. And like a dying lady, lean and pale, who totters forth wrapped in gauzy veil, out of her chamber led by the insane, in feeble wanderings of her fading brain, the moon arose up in the murky east, a white and shapeless mass. Hmm. Yeah, that one's kind of sad.
They're kind of depressing by his. Usually, he's much more
Colorful.
maybe. Maybe the pain is usually more of a positive pain, like "Why won't you kiss me?" rather than that kind of
Hmm.
almost morbid.
And kind of in the same vein as the last one, Art Thou Pale for Weariness by Percy Bysshe Shelley. Percy Bysshe Shelley. I don't know why I'm struggling with that.
It's fine.
Art thou pale for weariness of climbing heaven and gazing on the earth, wandering companionless among the stars that have a different birth, and ever changing like a joyless eye that finds no object worth its constancy?
That's similar in the end to the other one where he was saying soon, and it seemed to break out from the thing where it's structured in a certain way, and then constancy is just like in inconsistent with the rest of the poem, sort of ironically, but also it's beautiful and fitting. It's not. It's in my mind visually. I think of a spiral that's like a circle that the spiral built the circle and you wouldn't know it because you see the circle and at some point it breaks away where like a seed breaks into a tree or whatever you want to say. You have a structure that's very structured and then all of a sudden it reaches out of that structure which is also structured and going to make a larger macro form, but you can't see it yet because it's just reaching out and you're like, wait,
Mhm.
that's not part of the pattern, but it is. That's kind of like what my mind does with that.
Yeah. I mean, he's quite literally talking of the constancy and aimlessness of the moon. Art thou pale for weariness? Are you pale, moon, because you're weary of climbing of heaven and gazing on the earth? You walk the skies alone, wandering companionless among the stars that have a different birth. The stars are all the same. They all have the same nature. And as ever changing like a joyless eye, like the moon's waxing and waning and constantly changing, but finds no object worth its constancy. So to wander forever alone. And I think it's a very poignant and sad poem.
I
It's
have
neat wordplay too. That we're using the word constant and then constancy so close together, and it's not like jarring or monotonous seeming in any way.
I have
What are
a
your thoughts, Gordon?
oh I loved it. I loved it, but indeed it is a very sad poem, and I could indeed feel the melancholy behind it. Uh, I do have a poem here that I think may relate to what we were talking about, and you guys may enjoy, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's called A Song, Men of England, by Percy Shelley. Men of England, wherefore plough for the lords who lay ye low? Wherefore weave with toil and care the rich robes you tyrants wear? Wherefore feed and clothe and save from the cradle to the grave those ungrateful drones who would drain your sweat, nay, drink your blood? Wherefore bees of England forge many a weapon, chain, and scourge, that this stingless drone may spoil the force produce of your toil? Have ye leisure, comfort, calm, shelter, food, love, gentle balm? Or what is it ye buy so dear, with your pain and with your fear? The seed ye sow another reaps, the wealth ye find another keeps, the robes ye weave another wears, the arms ye forge another bears. Sow seed, but let no tyrant reap. Find wealth, let no impostor heap. Wave robes, let not the idle wear. Forge arms in your defense to bear. Shrink to your cellar halls and cells. In hall ye deck another dwell. Why shake the chains ye wrought? Ye see the stell ye tempered glance on ye. With plough and spade and hoe and loom, trace your grave and build your tomb, and wave your winding sheet till fair England be your sepulchre. I wanted to read this because of the social disobedience references. And yeah, I find it quite ironic because in the end we have still the same fights, and he mentions men of England in the title, but it's a worldwide phenomenon in which you know there are people that want everything and force other people to get it by taking their very livelihood. And it's terrible. It's somehow still the nature of our world in some ways. What were your thoughts on that one, Blocks?
Mm.
Vex?
Well, I keep coming back to the same conclusion as a musician, and pretty much that all of these romantics have such a clear use of meter. I'll actually bring this up really quick here. I was going to talk about this more later, but I just wanted to mention it right now. This is some technical poetic stuff for anybody who's interested. Feel free to look into more about meters and patterns. But this is going to be some poet analysis jargon here. The patterns are trochaic tetrameter, in which a strong syllable is followed by an unstressed syllable, and iambic tetrameter, in which an unstressed syllable is followed by a stressed syllable. Shelley combines the pattern of trochaic tetrameter and iambic tetrameter. And I don't, when I hear it, I don't think of those terms, those real technical stuff. But I do notice a specific dance and feel to it. It has a certain hopscotchy sort of thing going on that really absorbs my consciousness, and I realize is in sort of ironic opposition to the gravity of the content. Or maybe it's not ironic in the sense that maybe to me it just seems like heavy concepts that you would, fight against, speak truth to power. And perhaps to him, speaking truth to power is just as natural as skipping down the street. I never even really thought of that until this second. But I noticed a certain feeling of irony there as I listened to it.
Hmm.
Should we take the break now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead and cue the music. I'll just go ahead
Feels like
and
a natural transition.
Sounds
I'll
good.
go ahead and just banter over the music for a second as we close out to the break. Thank you everybody for being here. This is Not for Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for a Living, with your host, Jonathan Block, myself. We also have Vexing Cat doing some reading and analysis, getting us quotes, and our resident poet and reader, Cordell. Thank you so much for being here. We're going to take a quick 5. Smoke them if you got them. Use the restroom, grab a water. Probably be about 7 minutes and we'll be back to it.
Okay, give me one instant for the music, my friends. I will put some right now.
right. Come back from the break here. We're still live, right? Very good.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you everybody for being here. This is the second official episode of Not for Nothing, Poetry and Philosophy for a Living, with Cordell, Vexen Cat, and myself, your host, Jonathan Blanc. Today's subject is Percy Bysshe Shelley. We've gone over quite a bit of his historical context and influence. A friend of mine was just telling me about some of his motivations with the Napoleonic Wars and some of the veterans coming home and basically not being taken care of by society, and this fueling a lot of the anti-establishment stuff against the lords and tyrants. I was reading something earlier today about how he used those words interchangeably in certain poems intentionally to try and undermine the meaning of specific vocabulary and more getting into the general meaning of the circumstance of the times, sort of creating an intentional ambiguity of terms such as lord and tyrant. All right, coming back from the break, let's get right into some content here. We'll be getting very shortly into his specific philosophies, but what I'd like to do now is read a couple of poems. Make sure we don't get too much into the weeds on nerdy articulate stuff and forget to read poetry. Cordell, did you have one prepared?
Yes, I do. I was thinking to read you guys the first part of Mont Blanc, which, well, is a poem that he wrote. Um, the everlasting universe of things flows through the mind and rolls its rapid waves. No dark, no glittering, no reflecting gloom, no lending splendor, where from secret springs the source of human thought its tribute brings, of waters, with a sound but half its own. Such a feeble brook will oft assume, in the wild woods, among the mountains low, where waterfalls around it leaps forever, where woods and winds contend, and a vast river over its rock ceaselessly bursts and raves. So this is the first part of the Mont Blanc poem. It's divided into 5 parts. I figured I'll just read the first part now and perhaps the second a little bit later, if that's cool with you.
They're all of similar length?
Um, the next one is a little bit longer, but yeah, they pretty much the same length.
Well, since we can break it up a little bit, do you have any thoughts about that section? I think we should just go through it. Just go ahead and read it. We'll
Well,
just do it.
I personally liked it a lot because it it's a sort of metaphor on how the ideas um, take shape. And what I liked about it is we were talking a little bit before about the influences he had, and this particular lines reminds me of Alan Watts. Um, he once compared uh, the importance of being like water, because water doesn't care if it's shoved from one side to the other, and it doesn't care that it's coming from upwards and going downward. It's just, giving life everywhere it goes. And it kind of reminded me of that, in the sense that our humanity, our thoughts that evolve and progress during the ages, they are kind of like water going through um, the universe, basically. The existence we know. And And I'm pretty sure actually somebody like Alan Watts would totally have been inspired by that poem to make that sort of metaphor, you know.
I don't think it's what you're talking about, but you just reminded me of Heraclitus saying that the man never steps in the same river twice because of the ever flowing waters.
Yeah, I really like that sort of metaphor, particularly that it's, in this poem it's connected with how the human thinks, and what other more magnificent gift than the human thought. Without it, we would not be human, literally.
Hmm. Vexing, did you have a quote that you wanted to put interject at this point?
Oh, yeah, I've got a couple here. Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought. Fear not for the future, weep not for the past.
You know, just on that first quote you said there,
Hmm.
as a musician who loves minor stuff, this is outside of, I don't even know how to say this. The difference between happy and sad music to me is conceptually hard to understand why a minor scale would sound sad and a major one would sound happy. I really don't understand that because I do think that it exists outside of conditioning and context. There's something intrinsically sad sounding about minor music and happy about major, but I don't take it as being sorrowful and sad. It's like a a yearning beauty. Read that quote again about the sad thing.
Our sweetest songs are those that tell of saddest thought.
So the word sweet there, to me, the sweetest song, it, like with the example, like the Moonlight Sonata isn't a major song, it's a minor song. Stuff like that. These these things that are so beautiful. My favorite major music is like some of Mozart's stuff. Outside of that, I'm almost disinterested in major music. I like minor music. So that quote really resonates with me and my aesthetic tastes as a musician through chord tonality. It's kind of neat.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right.
Thanks for those quotes,
I
Max.
Hmm.
Yeah, they cheer me up, and they put us in the mood of the of his chains of thought. To be honest,
Hmm.
they really add up.
Yeah. I like this one. The man of virtuous soul commands not nor obeys. Makes me think of you, John.
hmm. All right. So I would like to read one of his more famous poems. I don't know how I feel about this one. And I don't mean that like I don't know if it's any good. I'm saying in so having studied, in looking into his philosophies and his whole trip, I don't get this one. I really don't understand. I think it's beyond my simple comprehension. But it's really famous and I think it's an absolutely beautiful poem. It's not a real sonnety type poem. I kind of I, I'm going to read it. This is Ozymandias. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them, and the heart that fled. And on the pedestal, these words appear: my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away.
I really like that
So,
poem.
as far as reading this one goes, I just want to mention I looked through a few times, and there's three voices. There's the person relating this story to you. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, and then there's the voice of the antique traveler for the rest of the poem, who within his has the quote from the pedestal. These words appear. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, you mighty in despair. Everything else is in that quoted person's voice, and I find that interesting that it's so obvious. Some poems it's a little harder to know who's talking or why. So this is couched as a specific story about a specific thing that's very intelligible and coherent in that sense. And then there's the content, which is so metaphorical and bizarre to me. Perhaps there's a slew of references here that are beyond my reality that would make it really obvious. Maybe some people are listening and just punching the wall, being like, oh, this is so obvious. But anywho, I like this one because it challenges some of my conception of what a poem is or isn't. Some things that are called poems to me are pretty clearly like forms of prose, but this one has the structure and certain rhyming parts, but it doesn't lean on the rhyming so much. And to me, this one is pretty obviously poetry, but not conventionally so like his other poetry. And I appreciate that challenging of form and me trying to figure out exactly how he meant this to be read, I guess I would say. In so reading it, I find it an interesting opportunity, not so much a challenge, but an inviting to think more about how all poetry is read.
Do you have any thoughts, Vex?
No, not at this time. I was really just enjoying the breakdown of Ozymandias.
In that case, I do have some thoughts to add up. Um,
Hmm.
the way I listen to the poem is it's like you said. So there is this guy. He meets a traveler, and the traveler tells him about a story in which basically he goes what in the desert where there is you know sand or something like that, and that traveler finds those ruins with uh, a plate on it with written I am the king of king, look at my work, and despair. And I'm thinking to myself, the passage of time takes everything away, even the glory of kings. That's how I interpret that poem. Like this guy sees something like the pyramid, but it's out of context. Nobody knows why it's there. It's just the ruins, the old ruins of something that has been forgotten, and that thing that was forgotten was at one point a major, powerful whatever. And yeah, to me there is some type of entropy in this poem, decay, like ending, a finality to it. We all end up being just the stories of people telling those stories to other people, basically.
Yeah, it seems to be some sort of reference to, I don't want to say futility, but the relative insignificance of any action that we have in our lives in the greater scope of the universe. And that this fictional guy, Ozymandias, King of Kings, is dead. And everyone he ever wanted to impose himself on or threaten or control are dead. And this echo of his power and reign exists due to his greatness and fighting to have done it. But then, as it says, round the decay of the colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Almost a reference to the relative metaphysical nature of that which lies outside of our understanding in our life. Like when he made that stuff, when the pedestal that Ozymandias had made was made, he didn't really think about it necessarily rotting into a time that didn't matter anymore. He did it for what did matter, but then here it is, like well past its time.
Beautifully put, honestly. That's, yeah, it is pretty
Be-
much what I felt too.
because this is one of his most famous pieces, and we're sitting here getting into it, I think I'm just going to go ahead and read it again. I met a traveler from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them, on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear: My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away."
Yeah, it's intense. It's beautiful and intense.
The first time I read this poem, I'm not going to say I didn't like it because that's not really how I react to art I don't understand. Like, I don't like it. I don't like that. Anyway, I felt at a loss to understand. I felt as though I read it wrong or I missed something or just and I think that reading this one wrong is kind of a misnomer in the sense I think you could read this exact same poem many ways. And then I think me missing something is obvious and that I could read this once a week for the next 10 years and probably pick up a little more. I think it's a great poem. It's not too shocking that it's so famous amongst his work.
You are right, though, it can be misinterpreted very easily, I'm pretty sure. Like, the way I see it, somebody could argue that Ozymandias is the source of, well, the King of Kings is the source of all the destruction around. But I think it's more about the passage of time than actually a king that destroyed everything and then a bypasser telling, I've witnessed the destruction of it all.
There's a part in here that seems like it should be obvious. I don't know if I'm missing something or not. It says, "Half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that its sculptor well those passions read." Okay, so I think this suggests. I don't know if they're saying that Ozymandias carved this himself, fine, but I don't take it from that. I feel as though, oh, yeah, he's talking about the plight of the working man. Okay, so Ozymandias, the King of Kings, he tells people to look at it in despair, which is kind of far out. But it's like he's talking about these lords who think they know stuff better than like other people, but because the wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command is done so well as an expression of art that the sculptor himself must have understood and been expressing something that was simply not Ozymandias at all. And now there's this line, which yet survives, stamped on these lifeless things. So the passions expressed by the sculptor survive stamped in these things. And then it says, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. What does that even mean? There's something like missing for me where he says he there's the visage, it has these expressions, and he's like the sculptor must have really understood, and then they survive stamped in these lifeless things. Maybe I'm missing something there. What's survived exactly? But now on to this line: the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. I don't understand. Like there's something I'm missing there, and I don't know what it is.
the way I understand it is it's about the duality of things. For example, you remember when we were reading that poem of William Blake, and he was mentioning the little kid going, the little chimney kid. Well, even though the chimney kid was complaining, he was still working as a chimney swipe. And that's the irony of this word, because in one side we get slapped until we're forced to do whatever we're forced to do, and on the other hand, for doing it, we get fed. And the way I understand it, the way it's presented in this poem, it's like mentioning this duality. If it's about the man that created the remains, which it's not the way I understood it, then he both mocked and fed that glory of Ozymandias. But if it's about Ozymandias being king, then indeed he also mocked his people and fed them. So I'm not sure on which side it aligns, but I think it's that duality that he mentions. The duality of being both fed and hit, basically. Hurt.
Mm-hmm. Vexing.
All ears.
Do you have a poem at the ready?
I will in just a second. Gotta scroll back through these. There were
Well, we'll
so
get to
many.
that. We'll get to that in just 1 second. I'm going to do a just brief overview of the philosophies of Percy Bysshe Shelley, and then we'll read another and probably just go straight into a more granular analysis of his philosophy.
Sounds good.
Okay. I think we covered it a little bit on the introduction. I read like a couple paragraphs from the Wikipedia on him. But anyway, he was a radical. If not by our standards, definitely for the time that he existed in. He advocated for atheism, vegetarianism, nonviolent political action, and throwing off of societal norms and conventions. So he was willing to speak truth to power in so few words, and also willing to do it in a very daring way that was unwilling to compromise his I don't know if pacifist the right word, but just nonviolent. He was one of the original advocates for nonviolent political action, and that is such a big deal to me in my philosophy and politic and society at large.
Yeah,
But go ahead and read a poem or two, Vexing. We'll get some of that content in here, and then I'm going to go ahead and start breaking down specifically what I've ascertained about his
His work.
philosophies. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. A Lament by Percy Bysshe Shelley. O world, O life, O time, on whose last steps I climb, trembling at that where I had stood before. When will return the glory of your prime? No more. Oh, nevermore. Out of the day and night a joy has taken flight, fresh spring and summer and winter hoar. Move my faint heart with grief, but with delight no more. Oh, nevermore.
Is that a different one ending with Nevermore, or did Cordell read that exact poem?
no, we read this poem before, but I still
Good.
enjoyed the reading. Thank you, Vex.
Mm.
It's agreeable to actually be able to listen to it without reading it.
All right. My mistake, guys.
I
Oh,
don't mind
Must have forgot
rereading
to
any of
close
them.
that one out.
I literally just read Ozymandias twice in a row.
Fair. How about the Hymn of Pan? That seems pretty short. There we go. Hymn of Pan by Percy Bysshe Shelley. From the forest and highlands we come, we come. From the river girt islands where loud waves are dumb. Listening to my sweet pipings, the wind in the reeds and the rushes, the bees on the bells of thyme. The birds on the myrtle bushes, the cicale above in the lime, and the lizards below in the grass were as silent as ever old Timolis was, listening to my sweet pipings. Liquid Peneus was flowing, and dark Tempe lay, in Pelion's shadow outgrowing the light of the dying day. Speeded by my sweet pipings, the Seleni in sylvans and fawns, and the nymphs of the woods and the waves to the edge of the moist river lawns, and the brink of the dewy caves, and all that did then attend and follow were silent with love, as you know, as you now, Apollo. Were silent with love as you now, Apollo, with envy of my sweet piping. I sang of the dancing stars, I sang of the daedal earth, and of heaven and the giant wars, and love and death and birth. And then I changed my pipings, and then I changed my pipings, singing how down the vale of Menalus, singing how down the vale of Menalus I pursued a maiden and clasped a reed. Gods and men, we are all deluded thus. It breaks in our bosom, and then we bleed. All weep as I think both ye now would, if envy or age had not frozen your blood at the sorrow of my sweet pipings. Hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. I
Thank you.
really feel like Percy had a thing for the whole Greek mythos and like fauns and Greek gods, and he has a lot of references to these romantic mythos. It's just kind of nice.
I think it's connected with history actually. You have to think that, well, what year was Percy? S- the end of the 18th century, beginning of 19th, right? So,
Yeah, I guess that would have been a popular teaching tool where they
well,
learned classical Greek and such.
during the Napoleonic War, the French embraced the um, well, actually, a little bit before the Napoleonic War, the French culture embraced the antiquity stories. There was like a revival of the whole antique gods, the pagans, and all that thing. And not in the sense of um, revival of old religion, but in the sense that they used that as metaphors to speak about, you know, things of nowadays. It's very famous in the French culture. Like even I'm not sure if you guys know about him, but the Fable de la Fontaine, the Fontaine fables, basically are fables that were rewritten from another writer from the antiquity. And I'm pretty sure Shelley probably was touched by that somehow, because on and on France and England being next to each other, they always had some cultural exchange to some level.
What do you guys think? Should I hop into some more granular philosophical analysis of the man, or maybe read a poem? You guys vote.
Well, you could read a poem. I actually have one. I'd like to read the second part of the Alps the Mont Blanc, I mean, that I started reading.
Hmm.
And but I definitely would like to hear more about, the well, do the rest of the show too. So
Yeah.
I think you should read one personally. We should
Okay.
just have fun.
We. You didn't happen to read the question already, did you?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, I don't think so. All right. This is the question by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I dreamed that, as I wandered by the way, bare winter suddenly was changed to spring, and gentle odors led my steps astray, mixed with a sound of waters murmuring. Along a shelf bank of turf, which lay under a corpse, cop, copsey? I don't even know that word. Under a copse, and hardly daring to fling its green arms around the bosom of the stream, but kissed it and then fled as thou mightst in a dream. There grew pied wind flowers and violets, daisies, those pearled articuli of the earth, the the constellated flowers that never sets, faint oxlips, tender bluebells, at whose birth the sod scarce heaved, and that tall flowers that wets, like a child, half in tenderness and mirth, its mother's face with heaven's collected tears, when the low wind its playmate's voice it hears. And in the warm hedge grew lush eglantine, green cowbind, and the moonlight colored May, and cherry blossoms, and white cups, whose wine was the bright dew, yet drained not by the day, and wild roses, and ivy serpentine, with its dark buds and leaves, wandering astray, and flowers azure, black, and streaked with gold, fairer than any weakened eyes behold. And near to the river's trembling edge, there grew broad flag flowers, purple pranked with white, and starry river buds amongst the sedge, and floating water lilies, broad and bright, which lit the oak that overhung the hedge, with moonlight beams of their own watery light, and bulrushes and reeds of such a deep green as soothed the dazzled eyes with sober sheen. Methought that the visionary Methought that of these visionary flowers I made a noosegay, bound in such a way that the same hues which in their natural bowers were mingled or opposed, like the like array. Keep these imprisoned children of the hours within my hand, and then, elate and gay, I hastened to the spot whence I had come, that I might there present it. Oh, to whom? Wow.
Hmm.
That was a good reading, dude. I love that.
Very good.
If it wasn't as long as it was, I'd just read it again for my stumblings. I really like this poem a lot. I read it once before. I didn't realize what I was getting into, all the different names of the flowers. I remember this one. And the first time I read it, I liked it. And this time, knowing more about him, I gotta say, I really like this one. So I take from it that he is appreciating the beauty of a specific circumstance in life and describing it really well. And the question is simply that he's appreciating it so much and wants to share it with someone. But since he's the one who is capable of interpreting this beauty in such a way that it's to some extent for him alone, trapped inside of his own experience, his own subjectivity, and that there's to some extent no one to share it with, and or simply a push towards finding someone to share it with and trying to be like either a complaint of solitude or a plea for togetherness, and it's not mutually exclusive. I would say that I sense this as it, it's such a naturalistic description of something that's framed around a philosophical question about, how could he share this perception with someone? Sort of both saying it seems impossible and also that he wants to do it. Not necessarily that it is impossible. Like frustration, hopeful frustration, I guess.
The thing is, with authors like this, specifically the romantic ones, that talk about metaphors and beauty for beauty's sake, we could argue that they are idealists that never really reached a objective and daydreams, because daydreams are the very seed of the foundations of where we get. But at the same time, I think those people are so creative and, yeah, basically so creative and originals that the the very fact that they engage in the process, the mental process of writing poems about things like this is actually, well, the fact of trying to reach out and attain it makes it attainable. And probably they reached some type of satisfaction, in the sense that, okay, there is a lot of frustration in not getting through people while a writer writes, but at the same time there is a beauty also in creating and being satisfied at the end of the day of what one has created. So yeah, I don't see
I
it as a total failure. People that live like that, I could never see them as idealists that failed totally.
I would argue well, I've seen it presented in my research that he was an idealist, or at least perceived as one. So
Hmm.
take that as you will.
Well, it really depends of the definition of idealism. If we're talking about idealism as in a progressive way, that is something that makes us evolve, then yeah, he definitely is. But if we're talking about idealism in the sense, oh, he's some guy that dreams about something that can never be achieved, then
Uh-huh.
I don't believe that that is the right definition for him.
Yeah, I think it was meant more as like an abstract philosophical one, where what he thinks is most important is, blank, like idealism as opposed to materialism or immaterialism or
Yeah,
what have you.
yeah, the real,
Okay,
yeah,
so before you read the next section of that, instead of getting into the nitty gritty on this, what I want to do is go ahead and just list off all of the specific philosophies and themes that I have determined to be in good faith applied to this gentleman, and then we'll get into that reading. And then after that, we can start to pick this apart some more. So I think this is kind of in order of importance. Anyways, in order of obviousness, I guess, or relevance. Atheism. It seemed to really affect his life politically, the way that he got rejected for that, and it affected a lot of stuff. And he was an atheist and talked about it and distributed pamphlets. Uh, B, nonviolence. He advocated for nonviolence, seemed to think it was very important, and that ultimately ended up being the most influential thing moving outward. So while the atheism restricted him during his lifetime, it seems as though the nonviolence is what really propelled him conceptually into all of our lives in more than one way. C, protest and political action. So he seemed to, the nonviolence wasn't just like for nothing, it needed to be connected to something. So he seemed to be very much a proponent of participating in governance and society for all men, all humans. I don't know about his egalitarianism actually, as far as male female relationship. I never even really looked into whether or not I would call him an egalitarian. But being that he was a utopian sort of visionary who talked about love, I feel as though it's likely. Idealism, he seemed to be an idealist. Vegetarianism, he advocated for vegetarianism, which is relevant because at that time it was a bad thing to. It made you look like a Looney Tune back then. So ultimately, that was him being daring and willing to push against the status quo. And I don't know where any of the viewers here are at on vegetarianism. I personally eat meat, but I love to cook a good vegan meal. I used to live with vegans, and I find the people who eat meat who won't eat vegan food to be kind of a bizarre creature. And basically, I think that different arguments for vegetarianism are at least intellectually healthy, if not correct. And I've been trying to lower the amount of animal fats in my diets basically for health. I don't know what his arguments for vegetarianism were. I'm assuming it was more of a moral based thing. I doubt it was a health thing. This is more of a theme than a philosophy, but love. You could tell that love was a very important thing to him in his work. I guess you could put beauty in there too, sort of a carnal version of love. I don't know how much he got into the whole agape thing as a theme through his work, but love was definitely a thing.
I
Anarchy,
have
yes,
I was going to say I have a short quote of his that was about love.
yeah.
Familiar acts are beautiful through love.
Hmm.
Something sweet.
Basically saying somebody doing something mundane that wouldn't seem so beautiful when you love the person or have a feeling, an amorous feeling, could become quite wonderful.
I could get coffee for myself, or I could get coffee for me and my significant other, and that is an act of love without thought.
I agree with you, Vax. It's
Mm.
very, yeah, it's true. Love makes the mundane beautiful, indeed.
All right. I feel a little bit like I cut off John there. Go ahead, John.
You're okay. I'll continue on with the short list here. Anarchy. I think we've discussed that a bit earlier. Anybody who just showed up to the stream, basically, when I say anarchy here, I don't mean stateless or chaos. I mean a bottom up anti-hierarchical approach that even could be called something like democracy. The way we have representative democracy in America, I believe, was influenced by some of this guy to some extent. He got into utopian ideals, back to the idealism. He kind of believed we were headed somewhere better. He probably believed in the inherent goodness of man outside of the corruption of lords and tyrants and all that. I'm not sure. He was a visionary, and this is an interesting thing about the philosophies. We're getting away from his poetry here, but into the man. This is a couple of sentences from the Wikipedia here. The first Hermit of Marlow pamphlet displays an acute sense of everyday politics, even a nearly Machiavellian shrewdness one rarely associates with Shelley. Read in terms of English politics, Leon and Cynthius, a much less ideal but more politically relevant poem than has been usually suggested. Um, but that Hermit of Marlow pamphlet apparently this guy was able to execute levels of political strategy that you wouldn't really put on a reflexive romantic. I think that's kind of adds some depth to the character of the man. But with that in mind, Cordell, would you like to read on to the next section of the five sections of that poem? What was the name of the group of poems?
So, the poem, the group of poem is called Mont Blanc, Lines Written in the Vale of Chamonix.
White Mountain?
Um, I can send you a link. That might
Yeah,
be easiest.
Mont Blanc. Isn't that
Yes.
White Mountain?
Mont Blanc is actually the you know that the tallest mountain in the world, the Mont Blanc.
Hmm.
I don't know how you guys call it in English.
Mount Everest.
I guess that's it. I'm
Okay.
pretty sure Mont Blanc is that. But anyway, yeah, it means white mountain.
And then there's K2, which is really close. Anywho, feel free.
Actually, I should check it out because I don't want to be saying mistakes.
No worries. I was just asking if Mont Blanc translates to White Mountain. I
Mont
think it would,
Blanc.
but
Oh no, I'm wrong. So no, it's the highest mountain in the Alps. So
yes.
um, that's where I was actually recently in the Alps. I could see it from where I was. Actually, yeah, I'm sorry. It nothing to do with Mount Everest.
That's fine.
So number two. Thus, thou ravine of Arve, dark, deep ravine, thou many-colored, many-voiced vale, over whose pines and crags and caverns sail fast clouds, shadows, and sunbeam, awful scene, where power in likeness of the Arve comes down from the ice gulf that girds his secret throne. bursting through these dark mountains like the flame of lightning through the tempest, thou dost lie. Thy giant brood of pines around thee clinging, children of elder time, in whose devotion the chainless winds still come and ever came to drink thy odor and thy mighty swinging, to hear an old and solemn harmony thine earthly rainbow stretch across the sweep of the ethereal waterfall whose veil robes some unsculptured image, the strange sleep which, when the voice of the desert fail, wraps all in its own deep eternity, thy caverns echoing to the earth's commotion, a loud, lone sound no other sound can tame. Thou art pervaded with that ceaseless motion. Thou art the path of that unresting sound. Dizzy ravine, and when I gaze on ye, I seem, as in a trance sublime and strange, to muse on my own separate fantasy, my human mind, which passively now renders and receives, fast influencing, holding an holding an unremitting interchange with the clear universe of things around. One legion of wild thoughts whose wandering wings now float above thy darkness and now rest where that or thou art not unbidden guest in the still cave of the witch poesy, seeking among the shadow that pass by, ghost of all things that are some shade of ye, some phantom, some faint image, till the breast from which they fled recalls them. Thou art there. I'm not sure I did the best reading there.
Don't be so hard on yourself. You sounded great. So it looks like it's up to me here. I've got a couple of quotes by Percy Shelley, and I also have another medium to longish poem. So, looks like the great instrument of moral good is the imagination. It's kind of an interesting thought. The great instrument, so morality, the moral good, so like morally good thing is the imagination. So if you can think of a good deed and do a good deed, then you're facilitating those morals. So just like with us and our donation today of like make a wish, we want to put positivity into the world. We want to do good and moral and happy things. And once again, we're anybody who wants to donate, we're taking donations for Make a Wish Society. It's a pretty amazing program. They they go around the world and help children to live out their wishes in their final moments because they work with a lot of very deserving children. Um, so let's see. No, Driki, let me read this out for you here. But now, when I think about it, his romantic poems made younger masses who are easier accepting of new ideas relate to him, thus taking new seeds into make those changes. I think you're really onto something there. He's really pushing the envelope and making people see the beauty and the romantic side of the world and like trying to do better, like be better. Another really great quote of his is government is an evil. It is only the thoughtlessness and vices of men that make it unnecessary evil. When all men are good and wise, government will of itself decay. Can you imagine every person being moral and upstanding and good and thereby no need of having to have a government other than like a council of elders making, choices. Should we repair the roads? Should we have more firemen? You know, we wouldn't need policemen. We wouldn't need people to fight against the dark if everyone was good and moral and kind. Um, it's something I would love to see in the world. I don't think I'm going to see it in my lifetime, but I can dream, I can wish, I can hope. I'm going to go ahead and read Hymn to Intellectual Beauty by Percy Bysshe Shelley. So, bear with me. The awful shadow of some unseen power floats through unseen among us, visiting this various world with an inconstant wing, as summer winds that creep from flower to flower, like moonbeams that behind some piny mountain shower. It visits it visits with inconstant glance each human heart and countenance, like hues and harmonies of evening, like clouds in starlight widely spread, like memory of music fled, like aught that for its grace may be dear and yet dearer for its mystery. Spirit of beauty that dost consecrate with thine own hues, or thou dost shine upon of human thought or form, where art thou gone? Why dost thou pass away and leave our state, this dim vast vale of tears, vacant and desolate? Ask why the sunlight not for ever weaves rainbows over yon mountain river. Why aught should fail and fade that once is shown? Why fear and dream and death and beer? Why fear and death and why fear and dream and death and birth cast on the daylight of this earth such gloom? Why man has such a scope for love and hate, despondency and hope? No voice from sublimer world hath ever to sage or poet these responses given. Therefore the names of demon, ghost, and heaven remain the records of their vain endeavor. Frail spare phrase frail spells whose uttered charm might not avail to sever from all we hear and all we see doubt, chance, and mutability. Lie Thy light alone, like mist over mountains driven, or music by the night wind sent through strings of some still instrument, or moonlight or a midnight stream, gives grace and truth to life's unquiet dream. Love, hope, and self-esteem, like clouds, depart and come from some uncertain moments lent. Man were immortal and omnipotent. Didst thou, unknown and artful as thou art, didst thou, unknown and awful as thou art, keep with thy glorious train firm state within his heart, thou messenger of sympathies that wax and wane in lovers' eyes, thou that to human thought art nourishment, like darkness to a dying flame. Depart not as thy shadow came, depart not lest the grave should be like life and fear a dark reality. While yet a boy, I sought for ghosts and sped through many a listening chamber, cave, and ruin and starlight wood, with fearful steps pursuing hopes of high talk with the departed dead. I called on poisonous names with which our youth is fed. I was not heard, I saw them not, when musings deeply on the lot of life at the sweet time when winds are wooing all vital things that wake to bring news of birds and blossoming. Sudden, thy shadow fell on me. I shrieked and clasped my hands in ecstasy. I vowed that I would dedicate my powers to thee and thine. Have I not kept that vow? With beating heart and streaming eyes, even now I call the phantoms of 1,000 hours. Each from his voiceless grave they have envisioned bowers of studious zeal or love's delight, outwatched with me the envious night. They know that never joy illumined my brow, unthinked with hope that thou wouldst free this world from its dark slavery, that thou, O awful loveliness, wouldst give whatever these words cannot express. The day becomes more solemn and serene. When noon is past, there is a harmony in autumn and a luster in its sky, which through the summer is not heard or seen, as if it could not be, as if it had not been. Thus, let thy power, which like the truth of nature on my passive youth descended to my onward life supply, its calm to one who worships thee, and every form containing thee, whom spirit fair thy spells did bind, to fear himself and love all humankind. Whew, that's a whopper.
Thank you for your
Hmm.
reading. That was awesome. What's
Yeah.
your take on it?
So this one's kind of a big one. I mean, this is definitely it's one of his longer poems, and I really like how he kind of there's this fluid movement, like a musical feel, like as you're reading you catch the wisps of it until it weaves into what you're saying, and you literally feel it. Like you feel the weight and the balance of this poem. Um, I mean, why human hearts can feel such hope and love when it is present, and such despair and hatred when it is gone. He's asserting that religion and superstition, notions like demons and ghosts and heaven, are nothing but attempts at, like, mortals or poets and wise men to try and explain and express their responses to the spirit of beauty. When you see something so transcendently beautiful, it takes your breath away. This is what he's talking about. Love and hope and self esteem come with this spirit of beauty, this aesthetic reasoning. I'm going back to aesthetics because I know my girl Luna's out there somewhere, and this is for her because this is aesthetics. The more I read, the more I feel, the more it just hums within me. That feeling of joy at a sunrise or a sunset, the happiness when you see a child running through a field of flowers. All of these things inspire love and hope and joy. And I think when people try to explain that away with like other things like superstition and oh it's God or oh it's this, and they lose the sheer simplicity of just enjoying and appreciating something for what it is. So, but that's kind of my take on it. What are your thoughts on it, Cordell?
Oh, I loved your take in actually. I personally was almost entranced by your reading while you were doing it. So uh, yeah, I feel I feel yeah, like you pretty much engulfed the whole concept.
Well, I
I like the
appreciate that.
I
Oh,
like
welcome back,
the
John.
I like the rhyming and the the various lack of rhyme. I like in general his sense of rhyming so that it's not painful and just obvious, but like, I mean, it's poetic wordplay, right? I mean, obviously it's going to have wordplay in it, but I just appreciate his sense of when to use poetic license or not. And it always feels so comfortable. And I really like that. Of the different quotes you had prepared, were any relevant at this point, or should we move on to the next section of Mont Blanc?
Let's grab these real quick. There were a couple that I thought were nice because this we were pretty eyeball deep into aesthetics and beauty and romanticism. And I read a couple before, but I think I'd like to go back to change is certain. Peace is followed by disturbances, departure of evil men by their return. Such recurrences should not constitute occasions for sadness, but realities for awareness, so that one may be happy in the interim. Kind of a nice one. History is a cyclic poem written by time upon the memories of man.
Yeah,
That's tasty. That
yeah,
just
that's
rolls off the mouth. That
like when I'm
just
always trolling about circles not existing. History doesn't exist either outside the mind of mankind.
oh yeah, when we pass from this earth, then our memories will be gone, and unless there's a written record that something else learns to interpret history
Yeah, yeah,
ends.
that's what I mean. It's without the
Mm.
realm of the mind. Like history is not a part of the material world. It's an idea.
Let's see.
Well, there is something to it though, because it is true what you're saying. It is an abstract concept, history, and the past itself, literally. But at the same time, when I look at the seeds that Shelley left behind for us to grow, it's. I do feel like, like a lot of people probably don't know about him, but they live by standards that he, well, promoted. So perhaps we cannot exist forever, but our very ideas are what is, what makes us go forward. And well, Shelley's a pretty good approach on that. He makes good points about that.
Do you want to read the next section of the five-parter?
Yes, for sure.
Let's get it.
So, um, part three. Some say that gleams of a remoter world visit the soul in sleep, then death is slumber, and that its shape the busy thoughts outnumber of those who wake and live. I look on high. Has some unknown omnipotence unfurled the veil of life and death? Or do I lie in dream, and does the mightier world of sleep spread far round and inaccessibly its circles? For the very spirit fails, driven like a homeless cloud from steep to steep, that vanishes among the viewless scales. Far, far above, piercing the infinite sky, Mont Blanc appears, still snowy and serene. Its subject mountains, they unearthly forms, pile around it, ice and rocks, broad veils between of frozen floods, unfathomable deeps, blue as the overhanging heaven that spreads and wing among the accumulated steeps, a desert peopled by the storms alone, save when the eagle brings some hunter's bone, and the wolf tracks her there. How hideously its shape are heaped around, rude, bare and high, ghastly and scared and riven in. Is this the scene where the old earthquake demon taught her young rune? Were these they toys? Or did a sea of fire envelop once the silent snow? None can reply. All seems eternal now. The wilderness has a mysterious tongue which teaches awful doubt, or faith so mild, so solemn, so serene, that man may be but for such faith with nature reconciled. Thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repel large gods of fraud and woo. not understood by all, but which the wise and great and good interpret or make felt or deeply feel. Damn, I feel like this was actually just about what you were talking about. Blocks, John. Wow.
Which part that I said?
Uh, like the the passage of time, and I don't know. It's there is some romantic part on it that reminded me of what you said just before. I don't know. I can't remember your exact word, but there was something that reminded me of you somehow.
Mm-hmm.
Like like okay, what I mean is, for example, uh, one of the last stanzas I read was uh, the wilderness has mysterious tongue which teaches awful doubt or fate so mild, so solemn, so serene that man may be. But for such fate with nature reconciled, thou hast a voice, great mountain, to repeal large codes of fraud and woe. No, that's not it. Well, at one point, basically, uh, oh, there we are. That's what I meant. Is this scene where the old earthquake demon taught her young run? Were these they toys, or did a sea of fire envelop those once, once this silent snow? None can reply. All seems eternal now. And that's the thing. The present seems eternal, but sometimes we can contemplate things that we know inspire eternity but came from past so long ago and so forgotten that we can't even explain it, like the Mont Blanc. Who can? Well, I guess nowadays we can explain by through science why the Mont Blanc is actually there, but back in those days, people looked at the Mont Blanc and they probably were wondering what type of force of nature pushed it to be.
Yeah, like I saw this thing. I was looking at some analyses of his work, and somebody mentioned determinism, and it's almost like he was making certain references to scientific determinism and how it relates to other aspects of reality, and almost like some level of like inevitability of people like doing the right thing
Hmm.
or something.
It makes sense. I would argue that we have the potential well, all humans have the potential to know when they're doing something helpful. It makes sense that it's determined that we would preferably do something helpful than hurtful. I mean, that's my
Yeah.
logic, though.
So I suggest we proceed as such. I'm going to read a little more out of the Wikipedia on Shelley. This is going to be specifically on the philosophy part, on idealism, nonviolence, and vegetarianism. Then we can get into section 4 of that poem, and we'll get back to some quotes after that. So, this is the section from the Wikipedia on Percy Bysshe Shelley. Idealism. Shelley's unconventional life and uncompromising idealism, combined with his strong, disapproving voice, made him an authoritative and much denigrated figure during his life and afterward. He became an idol of the next two or three or even four generations of poets, including the important Victorian and pre Raphaelite poets Robert Browning, Alfred Tennyson, Dante Gabriel Rossetti, and Algernon Charles Swinburne, as well as Lord Byron, Henry David Thoreau, W.B. Yeats, Aleister Crowley, and Edna St. Vincent Millay, and poets in other languages, such as Jan Kasprowicz, Rabindranath Tagore, Jibanananda Das, and Subrahmanyan Bharathi. I am just going to mention I probably butchered every one of those names. Nonviolence. Henry David Thoreau's Civil Disobedience, the writings of Leo Tolstoy, and Mahatma Gandhi's passive resistance were all influenced and inspired by Shelley's theories of nonviolent resistance in protest and political action. It is known that Gandhi would often quote Shelley's The Mask of Anarchy, which has been called perhaps the first modern statement on the principle of nonviolent resistance. That text, The Mask of Anarchy, is
User blocks? We can't hear you anymore. Oh, we've. Hello?
did I get cut out for a second there?
Yeah, you did, but you're back.
Cordell,
Testing.
you're muted.
All right. The Mask of Anarchy is a British political poem written in 1819, and it's pretty long and pretty good. I was just looking into it now. Can we hear you now, Cordell?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay,
Are you good?
very good. Um, finish this piece off here. This is the vegetarianism section from his philosophy on the Wikipedia. Shelley wrote several essays on the subject of vegetarianism, the more prominent of which were A Vindication of Natural Diet, 1813, and On the Vegetable System of Diet. Shelley's eagerness for vegetarianism is connected with India. In 1812, he was converted to vegetarianism by his friend John Frank Newton, who had himself been converted while living in India. Shelley, in heartfelt dedication to sentient beings, wrote, If the use of animal food be, in consequence, subversive to the peace of human society, how unwarrantable is the injustice and the barbarity which is exercised towards these miserable victims. They are called into existence by human artifice that they may be drag out a short and miserable existence of slavery and disease, that their bodies may be mutilated, their social feelings outraged. It were much better that a sentient being should never have existed than that it should have existed only to endure unmitigated misery. Never again may blood of bird or beast stain with its venomous stream a human feast, to the pure skies in accusation streaming. And it is only by softening and disguising dead flesh by culinary preparation that it is rendered susceptible of mastication or digestion, and that the sight of its bloody juices and raw horror does not excite intolerable loathing and disgust. In Queen Mab, a philosophical poem, 1813, he wrote about the change to a vegetarian diet. And man, no longer now, he slays the lamb that look him in the face, and horribly devours his mangled flesh. That is all I'm going to read from that, but it gives some more context on the specifics of uh, his nonviolence and vegetarianism and idealism, just to give a little more detail there. I don't think he really called himself a philosopher, but being so politically active and wanting to get out there and influence people's ideas, whether he called himself a philosopher or not, I think it's obvious that he held certain ideas very dear to his heart. And, we could debate about what is or isn't philosophy or whether philosophy even exists. I've got some friends who like to say it's not even a real thing outside of application to human life. And that's actually just living life, not so much philosophy. But I think it's noteworthy. Um, Vexing, did you have any quotes on hand?
As it happens, of course I do. Let's grab some of these here. Nothing in the world is single. All things by a law divine in one another's being mingle. Why not I with thine?
That's the end of that one poem I read. That's
Mm-hmm.
good.
I
Yeah,
like
no,
it.
I like that.
Let's see. Nothing wilts faster than laurels that have been rested upon.
Read that again.
Nothing wilts faster than laurels that have been rested upon.
It's so different the way it's said, but that reminds me of something where it says like greatness is nothing that's like in the past. You have to recreate yourself every day. That's that's really good.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Well, I think we're going to go in just a second to part 4 of the 5-part poem that Cordell was reading. But first, this poem's way too long for me to read, but I wanted to start off with this The Mask of Anarchy, also referred to as a British political poem written in 1819 or 1819 in poetry. So it's known as some different stuff, but I just wanted to read the first couple of stanzas of this rather long poem. Let me see how many stanzas are there here. This is 91 stanzas, and each stanza is just 4 lines. I'll read the first 4 stanzas. As I lay asleep in Italy, there came a voice from over the sea, and with great power it forth led me to walk in the visions of poesy. I met murder on the way. He had a mask like castle gray. Very smooth he looked, yet grim. 7 bloodhounds followed him. All were fat, and well they might be in admirable plight. For one by one, and two by two, he tossed them human hearts to chew, which from his wide cloak he drew. Next came Fraud, and he had on, like Eldon, an emerald gown. His big tears, for he wept well, turned to millstones as they fell. The next one's uh, I'm just going to go on a little further. And the little children who round his feet played to and fro, thinking every tear a gem, had their brains knocked out by them. So, um, suffering of children, injustice, class consciousness. You can see why Marx was into this guy. I think it's very interesting the direct similarities and then the divergences between this guy and Blake, because we just did William Blake last week. He was a romantic. And in certain ways, I feel like these guys are really similar. It makes me wonder how much he changed in his limited career, too, if uh, Percy Bysshe Shelley had another even 20 years, maybe to 50 years old, how much of a different perspective we would have received from a 45-year-old Percy Shelley as opposed to the 29, 30-year-old man who died of pneumonia.
Hmm.
It's pretty sad. Reminds me how I feel about Mozart, where the man died before. I mean, the idea of the next 20 years of Mozart's music being missing is something that just, yeah, I'm shook.
I feel it's a terrible loss when you consider what he wrote at his age.
Yeah.
Jesus, 30 years later, he would have been a genius. I read actually somewhere that the peak age for writers is usually around the end of their 40s, closing in their 50s. And the reason of that is because of experience and the sheer amount of work they do during a lifetime. And then most writers go back in the past, in their own past, and retake stuff they've wrote and then rewrite it at their 50s. So it is very plausible that if he had reached the peak age of writers, he would probably have taken back his own poems and enhanced them even further, which honestly is a loss that can't even be quantified.
Hmm.
What do you think about getting into part 4 of Mont Blanc?
Sounds like a plan. Okay, let me get in front of it. And there we go. The fields, the lakes, the forest and the streams, ocean, and all the living things that dwell within the dead earth, lightning and rain, earthquake and fiery flood and hurricane, the torpor of the year when feeble dream visit the hidden buds or dreamless sleep, holds every future leaf and flower, the bond with which from that detested trance they leap, the work and ways of man, they death and birth, and that of him, and all that his may be. All things that move and breathe with toil and sound are born and die, resolve, subside, and swell. Power dwells apart in its tranquillity, remote, serene, and inaccessible. And this, the naked countenance of earth, on which I gaze, even these primeval mountains, teach the adverting mind. The glacier creep like snakes that watch they prey from they far mountains, slow rolling on. There many a precipice, frost, and the sun in scorn of mortal power have piled dome, pyramid, and pinnacle, a city of death distinct with many a tower and wall impregnable of beaming eyes. Yet not a city, but a flood of ruin is there that from the boundaries of the sky rolls its perpetual stream. Vast pines are strewing its destined path, or in the mangled soil, branchless and shattered stand the rocks drawn down from yon remotest waste have overthrown the limits of the dead and living world, never to be reclaimed, the dwelling place of insects, beasts, and birds become its spoils, they food and they retreats forever gone, so much of life and joy is lost. The race of man flies far in dread, his work and dwelling vanish like smoke before the tempest stream, and their place is not known. Below vast caves shine in the rushing torrents restless gleam, which from those secrets chasm in tumult welling meet in the vale, and one majestic river, the breath and blood of distant land, forever rolls its loud waters to the ocean waves, breathes its swift vapor to the circling air. Wow. Okay, I'm done.
Excellent reading.
Yeah. Wow. This is.
There's still a fifth part after that, right? That was the fourth part?
Yes, there is still a fifth
Yeah.
part.
I feel like, I don't know what it was, but as I listened to you, I felt as though that, not even that whole poem, but that section of the poem grabbed you more and just started to not sing, but it, the story told itself through your voice effortlessly.
Well, to be honest, I was in the Alps recently, and as I was reading this, I was actually thinking about the place I went to visit, and he does an excellent work at actually writing about it. Like,
Oh, that flower one I read earlier, I was really imagining this lovely pool. the descriptive writing element of it on its own, to me, it's funny that we're talking so much about philosophy and this and that, and I suppose philosophy can really be involved with observation and aesthetics. But I find it ironic that in so looking at him as a philosopher poet, I personally have ended up really marveling at the simple descriptive writing element of it. It's so good.
Yeah, yeah. I'm actually really impressed by this one because honestly, it describes extremely well what I've seen recently, like a month ago or something. The whole pyramid and pinnacle, a city of death, distinct with many a tower and wall impregnable of beaming eyes. When I was
Mm.
up there in the Alps, there are actually abandoned village, French village, from 100 years ago, and I was thinking about the city of dead, basically the abandoned cities. And as I was reading this, well, obviously he wasn't talking about abandoned village, but he was talking about, I guess I connected with the anterior, part I read, because in some way it's like to reach heaven the way Mont Blanc has, that mountain has, it requires, uh, you know, like some type of calm and depth and silence, and nothing lives up there because nothing can live up there. So basically, it requires. It's the end of the line for that mountain. What else can it do? Explode or reach on top of the highest tops? It can't. Well, it can, but that's not the point. It's to get there. It already has done everything it could. Basically, it was a land with fishes, with animals that left their traces, and then it became a mountain little by little. I actually brought back a few fossils from over there, and there are signs that back in the days, the Mont Blanc was actually underwater, which I love. It's impressive that he makes references of that.
Mm.
Right.
Would you like me to read the last part right away, or perhaps you guys have something in between?
I think I'm ready to hear the finished part personally.
What about you, Blocks? Should I just finish the fifth part?
Yeah.
Okay. Mont Blanc yet gleams on high. The power is there, the still and solemn power of many sight and many sounds and much of life and death. In the calm darkness of the moonless night, in the lone glare of day, the snows descend. Upon that mountain none behold them there, nor when the flakes burn in the sinking sun, or the star beams dart through them. Winds contend silently there, and heap the snow with bread, rapid and strong, but silently its home the voiceless lightning in this solitude keeps innocently, and like vapor broods over the snow. The secret strength of things which govern thought, and and to the infinite dome of heaven is as a law inhabits thee. And what were thou, and earth, and stars, and sea, if to the human mind's imagining silence and solitude were vacancy? Oh,
I think I've heard that before. that part. Like I think I've seen sections of this poem elsewhere because I remember that from somewhere, and I'm almost certain I haven't read all of this.
No, of course.
Yeah.
It's awesome though. I really enjoy it because he does describe something peculiar about the Alps. It's the quietness. It's extremely quiet over there. It's one of the most silent places I've been. Um, when I visited Alaska, for example, it was teeming with life, you know, and well, I could hear animals around, but um, the Alps is actually deeply quiet.
Well, we're coming towards the end of the show here. I like to get a little bit of original content from either one of the viewers or our resident poet Cordell, or even myself. I don't refer to myself as a poet, but I have written some poems, and I have one here that I wrote that I think is relevant enough that I'm going to go ahead and read that in a moment. Cordell, if you don't have one of your own personals prepared, would you go ahead and grab that now? I want to go through some of the rest of my notes here before we finish up. So I had a list of related philosophers, related poets, and then related societal movements. That's already been gone over, though. The nonviolence, protest and political action, and the civil rights movement in America was influenced and related to Bysshe Percy Bysshe Shelley's whole trip. Related philosophers, you've got the influenced ones here. We've got Tolstoy, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, Karl Marx. I saw William Godwin as a related philosopher. I believe that Godwin's anarchist propositions influenced him a lot. So this is more of a chain of influence than really related philosophers. I don't really know how to find related philosophers that weren't influential or influenced by this man. Influences to or influences of, meaning I guess we could get into idealism from the Romantic era if you want. And then related poets. He was friends with Lord Byron. They influenced each other. John Keats, Leigh Hunt, Thomas Love Peacock, and then the famous Mary Shelley, who wrote Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I don't think she's known as a poet, but there's some pop culture relevance. Vexing, did you have any other quotes that you thought were relevant to put in at this time? Maybe even any other Shelley poems before we wrap this thing up that you wanted to get into? Related
Hmm.
poems.
Let's see. I think a poet is a nightingale who sits in darkness and sings to cheer its own solitude with sweet sounds. Is a good one. First our pleasures die, and then our hopes, and then our fears, and when these are dead, the debt is due dust claims dust, and we die too.
I can't even tell if that was a positive or negative or neutral sentiment.
Seems like a Percy Shelley to me.
Oh, did he write that while he was dying?
Could
And he
be.
knew he was, oh, that's something I found out too. He knew he was going to be dead. Like he was given a death sentence by doctors, told to move to Italy because of the air. He was dying of pneumonia. He coughed up blood and basically was like, "Oh, I'm actually going to die." And then he started this campaign of trying to help the future and help children to learn, to help young people understand the importance of his philosophies and viewpoints and atheism and that stuff. So the idea
Bring
that,
betterness to the next generation so that way it
yeah,
can continue on.
It would make
altruism and
sense.
posterity were a huge part of his trip, and it was anyways, arguably. But the man knew he was going to die and started putting the energy that he had left rather than into healing or having fun or whatever it was. He basically tried to make sure to do something with the little time that he had left to help the future of humanity.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah. Let's see what else. As far as short poems by Percy Shelley, we've covered kind of a wide spectrum of his poetry. Let me grab It's hard to tell which ones. I wish I had like a check mark next to everyone that we've read because he has so many really good.
Again, we can read the same
It's,
twice,
it's
you
true.
know? No
Here's
worries.
a really cute short one. The Fitful Alterations of the Rain by Percy Bysshe Shelley. The fitful alterations of the rain, when the chill wind, languid as with pain of its own heavy moisture here and there, drives through the gray and beamless atmosphere. He sure loved to write about nature, didn't he?
He's,
Nature is inspiring.
I feel like
It really is.
when I try to write poetry and end up doing different things, like I have my perspectives, I have my philosophies, I have my politic, and then there's art. Then there's pure expression, which doesn't have to have anything to do with those things. And I feel that complexity from this man, where sometimes he's talking about one thing, but then he's talking about light beams and bending perspectives. And I feel as though he transcends away from his whole trip often enough to simply describe a flower, and he means it, even if it is enveloped into a perspective sort of existential construct about who is he going to share this beautiful flower with. And like in that one, it reminded me of some of my stuff where I'm thinking about stuff, and then all of a sudden it's like I'm thinking about it, which is an abstraction, but it ends up streamlining it into actually describing my senses and having beautiful descriptive writing. Not to refer to my own writing as beautiful, but what I mean is an attempt to articulately describe beauty as an activity unto itself. And I just feel this like kinship with him as he writes as I experience his writing on this, where I can sort of feel this this existential sort of crying out into the void by simply trying to write down what he sees that's beautiful, and it really resonates
Mm.
with me.
Yeah, he's got a. I got a couple of little tidbits here. So I do believe we discussed Love's Philosophy earlier, didn't we? And I grabbed a quote from it before. Would you like me to read that poem now?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. Love's Philosophy by Percy Bysshe Shelley. The fountains mingle with the river, and the rivers with the ocean. The winds of heaven mix forever with a sweet emotion. Nothing in the world is single, all things by a law divine. In one spirit meet and mingle, why not I with thine? See the mountains kiss high heaven, and the waves clasp one another. No sister flower would be forgiven if it disdained its brother. And the sunlight clasps the earth, and the moonbeams kiss the sea. What is all this sweet work worth if thou kiss not me?
That was beautiful.
Mm.
That poem's fun to read, by the way, out loud. I mean, I don't know about reading to yourself, but if any of you guys go to read his stuff, I recommend reading that one out loud. Maybe all of it.
I can see why this man was like, breaking hearts and having multiple women fall in love with him.
He just seems like a total scamp to me,
Yeah,
like reading
I
his
think the word
stuff.
you're looking for is tramp.
Oh, okay.
I
Wait,
mean,
what's
he
scamp
left
mean?
his first. Well, a scamp would be like a kid, somebody who's acting, playful and a little bit naughty. Whereas a
That too.
tramp is,
Both. No,
yeah,
both.
both.
I meant scamp, but you're right. Tramp's fine too. But I mean a scamp, like just like, oh, come on, like this sort of childishness to it, you know?
Hmm.
Like,
It
can't we
is
just
sad
make
though.
out?
You know, I
I think
actually pictured the same character. We spoke so much about beauty and s- okay, some form of naivete and optimism. Like, you know, I look at beauty just for beauty's sake, basically. And I bet the guy must have been in his real life actually probably pretty romantic i- in his deeds, you know. So yeah, I suspect a lot of people fell in love with him.
He had some natural salesmanship in his game too.
Yeah, I could see that. Because if you're telling me that he was active, like doing, you know, spreading ideas, he
Yeah.
must have been approaching people and be like, "Hey, you're beautiful. Here's some new idea. Let's try to
He's
make the world more beautiful together."
yeah, he's literally printing pamphlets and handing them out, underground pamphlets, like against the will of the institutions that are like, "Stop that! You're an atheist vegetarian. We're all going to go to jail."
It's
All right.
funny.
Yeah.
So I am going to go ahead and read a poem I wrote here. This is a rather philosophical poem. I don't know how much it relates directly to Percy Bysshe Shelley, but it relates directly to the charter of this show. I'd say that there, be it as it may, but I want to just highlight that this poem talks about something that brought me to this point where I'm trying to help illustrate a through line between poetry and philosophy, poesis, understanding, the poesis of thought, where we try to create something that didn't exist from something that's seemingly magical, which is the mind, our ability to understand the universe and its ineffable and quasi inunderstandable nature. Yet over time, we do manage to describe it bit by bit, a little bit more at a time. And I find that to be an admirable endeavor. And this poem is a reference to that, if not an attempt in itself. Words by Jonathan Block. Words on a journey from one mind to another. These words existed before us from an impossible mother. They will continue through time as we etch them in permanent sand. Our understanding of what is, without these words, be damned. Stoic and dumb, standing alone, without words of beauty, what good can be shown? Fighting against ambivalence of a time now long gone, resonating as one, our journey begun.
Hmm.
Vibrant pleas of the heart cry out through dull paper, making ideas appear from ethers and vapors. Our imagination creates the world devised as we create what we see with our very eyes.
Hmm.
So the second line there, where I'm talking trash about stoicism, even though I like stoicism, without words of beauty, I think this is a bit of a romantic sentiment to connect with Shelley, and that I'm trying to say that without, you know, that basically not trying to not express our passions is folly. And then towards the end there, I would say arguably it's obvious that I'm referencing phenomenology or something along those lines.
I
So
think
there you
you're referencing the modern term of Stoicism, in which, because there is two way of talking about Stoicism. There is the classical version, which is antiquity, Marcus Aurelius, Episcopus, and stuff like that. And then there is the modern version, in which basically Stoic means um, living in a very sober way in which nobody expresses anything. But those are two very different concepts.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
again, I like stoicism, so I don't want anyone to take that the wrong way. It's just this farcical caricature of stoicism where you can stand alone and don't need anybody's help. You know, standing on the shoulder of giants emotionally is irrelevant, and then with tears running down your face, screaming at the absurdity of the universe is somehow a negative activity, where I would say to express anything is potentially positive, and that these expressions themselves are of value and can be explored and thought about. So, yeah, it's basically a conceptual solidarity with anybody that's willing to express emotional. I mean, it doesn't have to be romanticism, but these romantic ideals of expressing your emotional self as being an important duty unto itself. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into it. That's There you go. I thought that this was relevant to the stream and podcast at large, so I wanted to just bring at least some original content to the table. Did you have an original prepared, Cordell?
Yes, but first I wanted to thank you for sharing your poem because, to be honest, it's a beautiful poem. And even if I did say something about the Stoicism, it's just to make it more precise. But in itself, I understood the concept and the idea, and it's pretty clear what you meant. So don't
Thank you.
worry so much about, trying to explain it because,
I think the meter on
yeah.
this one could use some work. Like, it's not terrible, but I feel like if somebody other than me read it, it's just sort of a, a, a rhythmic train wreck, and I could probably refine it some and maintain the meaning. So I might be rewriting this one.
Well, one of my motivation for reading poems online and recording them is
Hmm.
uh, one day I was reading uh, Thomas Dylan, I think. Uh, well, an American poet, and I wasn't aware of it, but he actually recorded some of his poetry read by himself before he passed, and those are black and white videos with an awful sound, basically. But the rhythm he gave is so particular, and I've listened to the same poem read by, you know, actors, and I could tell that they definitely got inspired by his reading, that they had to
Mm-hmm.
look how he read it to read it
Yeah,
themselves.
yeah.
So I understand, what you mean by that. That the rhythm is something that you want to share because otherwise people can mess it up
I
somehow.
mean, like as a waiter, I used to be a waiter, and basically one of the theories is like, as a waiter, you want to anticipate the guest needs and exceed their expectations. And in that sort of, because that's not anything specific. I mean, that's just really abstract. It doesn't say anything you're supposed to do. It's like, figure out what you're supposed to do before they know, and then do it better than they want, right? So what I mean is that for me, in that sort of theory, I'd like it if the poem read itself, which I know is impossible. But once it starts reading, I'd like it if you couldn't help but read it basically how it's supposed to be read. And if you didn't, then it would like feel awkward. So like, and that's not even like me imposing myself onto a poem so much as saying the poem itself can sort of take a life of its own, and I'm almost like coaxing it into existence rather than making something. I'm like, "Ooh, I found something, guys. Look." See what you think.
Well, I think the problem. Well, it's not a problem. It's more of a it's something that it's the nature of poetry. When we read poetry, people will always, interpret the poems themselves. In their head, they
Hmm.
will relate to it in their own way. That said, um, well, for example, we were reading Ozymandias, and it's a good example. I'm sure somebody that would be into extremist thoughts could interpret that poem in a totally different way than we would if he didn't know about the background of Shelley. And that's the thing. Sometimes it's worth uh, knowing where the poems comes from and what's the situation, the environment in which it was written, presented, and stuff like that. Because otherwise, it's totally out of context and basically, it's just a few words that follow each other, and we can. Okay, a phenomenon that I like to take as an example is, for example, with kids. You know how you can tell them really bad news, but with a very cheerful voice, and everybody's happy just because you say it in a very cheerful voice. um, there is something to that. In human nature, we can take some quotes and turn them around to make them mean something else than what they mean. And that's why context is so important. And that's why you're totally right to actually, point out the Stoicist uh, context of your poem.
Hmm.
But yeah, I did prepare a poem here that I'd like to share.
Fantastic. Right before you share that,
Hmm.
what I would like to do is draw attention to the charity that we're promoting for this episode, which is the Make a Wish Foundation. We have a specific link for it that will be attached to the stream and the podcast. this this is not an affiliate thing. We don't make anything from this. We're going to be choosing a different charity each single week to recommend that our audience goes and gives some small amount of money to. I mean, I suppose if you're wealthy, give a bunch, but what I'm saying is, if you're comfortable and have cable and aren't hungry and can afford the rent, maybe consider giving $5 to this charity. It's not necessary, but we just wanted to give a little exposure to that, in the sense that even though we're not highly wealthy individuals, we as a group feel very grateful for what we have in our lives, and this is something that we get to do, to share something we enjoy with people. So we thought, on top of just trying to spread our love for poetry and philosophy, it would be good to just take different charities that we could get behind and recommend them. Last week we had recommended people go over to Humble Bundle and buy this specific bundle to support the wildfire relief in Australia, and we had a link for that. And this week we're doing the Make a Wish Foundation. There's a specific link that Cordell found. That's pretty much it. If you can afford to give them something, do. They've done a lot of really good work for children over the years that are terminal, and giving them something pleasant in the brief time they have on this planet. Anyways, thanks so much for watching the stream. We're going to be wrapping up pretty soon. This is a original from Cordell, and then we'll have the final thoughts from the cast, and then call it.
Yeah.
Cordell.
So this one is called After All's Gone. After all's gone, all that's left is knowledge. Even as my throat is under dead sight, and I feel my breathing sliced by its edge, I see what splits the past from sentences light. The runes fall into deafening crashes, and the smouldering leftovers are gone. Soon even the rubbles become ashes. All is gone, and what's left has crashed down. Still, the memory of it all is fresh. Where now there is nothing left, I can see thousands of dead standing alive in the flesh, calling for their home or their ruined city. Memory may fail, but the knowledge keeps on. Perhaps one day all will be forgotten. Ignorance under some veil may creep on, and our secret gardens soon be rotten. However, as long as there will be skills, mentors and students to teach or learn, and for education a feeling of thrill, even where there is nothing, hope returns. So that was it.
Right on.
If you don't mind, I actually have a second one that I'd like to read very quickly.
What is it? Yes. Do it.
It's called To Goodness. And yeah, I just wanted to share this one because I figured sometimes it's
Is this
worth.
another original?
Yes. Yes.
Good.
So, To Goodness. If the past doesn't exist anymore, and the hereafter hasn't come to be yet, the present would be everything therefore, and everything could always be reset. It matters not to follow everyone, nor to compete to beat everyone else. It matters not that one has lost or won. All that matters is to help those in distress. There is no being better or normal, nor such thing as always acting formal. There is only helping without bias. Even if everyone else defies us. There isn't apologies or thankfulness that could replace fair acts toward others. When all around there is no more kindness, help others by doing for them wonders. Wonders will always be what is needed. It won't be what is vainly desired, it will be simple acts that once seeded will grow into what's really required. Yet one has to do and not just observe, or even worse, to simply ignore it. Even then, praising should not be deserved, as no one should ever be a misfit. That's it. That's it for tonight.
Oh,
All
that was
right.
beautiful. Thank you, Cordell.
Ah, you're
So
welcome.
it's the last chance if we were going to throw in any readings of Percy Bysshe Shelley. Not that we couldn't read his poems in another week randomly, but for this episode, I think I caught all the ones I definitely wanted to read.
I only have
Uh,
one left,
oh,
but it's kind
well,
of a
let's.
medium length one, but we can always do it another time.
No, please
No,
go.
we're gonna throw that in to close out. I'm just
Okay.
gonna say my last piece here and say thank you so much from Vexing Cat, Cordell, Luna, Apex, and myself, Jonathan Block. Thank you for being here. It's been a wonderful show. I really had fun preparing for it. Next week's going to be Holderlin. He's a German romanticist, uh, German romance
Romantic
movement.
poet, I believe you
Yeah,
say.
there we go. German romantic. So I've already started looking into him. I'm excited about that. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I encourage audience participation. If you're listening to this in the podcast and want to come listen to the live stream on Saturdays, it's at 0800 hours Greenwich Mean Time on
Yeah,
Twitch.
approximately that time, yes.
All right. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great night. Vex, you want to close it out with reading that poem?
Certainly. It's called The Question by Percy Bysshe Shelley. I dreamed that, as I wandered by the way, bare winter suddenly was changed to spring, and gentle odors led my steps astray, mixed with the sounds of waters murmuring. Along a shelving bank of turf which I lay, under a copse and hardly daring to fling its green arms round the bosom of the stream, but kissed it and then fled, as thou mightest in a dream. There grew pied windflowers and violets, daisies, those pearled arcturi of the earth, the constellated flower that never sets, faint oxlips, tender bluebells at whose birth the sod scarce heaved, and that tall flower that wets, like a child half in tenderness and mirth, its mother's face with heaven's collected tears. When the low wind its playmate's voice it hears, and in the warm hedge grew lush eglantine, green cowbind and moonlight colored May, and cherry blossoms in white cups whose wine was the bright dew, yet drained not by the day, and wild roses and ivy serpentine, with its dark buds and leaves wandering astray, and flowers azure, black, and streaked with gold, fairer than any wakened eyes behold. And nearer to the river's trembling edge, there grew broad flagged flowers, purple pranked with white, and starry river buds among the sedge, and floating water lilies, broad and bright, which lit the oak that overhung the hedge with moonlight beams of their own watery light, and bulrushes and reeds of such deep green as soothed the dazzled eye with sober sheen. Methought that of these visionary flowers I made a nosegay bound in such a way that the same hues which in their natural bowers were mingled or opposed, the like array, kept these imprisoned children of the hours within my hand, and then, elate and gay, I hastened to the spot whence I had come, and that I might there present it, oh, to whom? The question is, to whom would he give this nosegay of flowers? It's a
It's
lovely
a great
question.
one.
Yeah.
It was beautiful. A very beautiful end of
Well,
show poem.
good evening, good night, good day, whatever applies. Thank you guys for coming.
I'm gonna put on the music for the end of the stream. See you soon, guys.
Lovely. Thank you.